News was abuzz with new victims of the serial killer in Daejeon. The investigation concluded that there was no connection between the deceased in terms of gender and age. The maniac acted completely indiscriminately, terrifying the entire city. It became a personal hell for her, because the Uni was also killed. Life in the metropolis continued, hiding dark secrets behind the facades of high-rise buildings. The WBC television office was in full swing, with its usual work, indifferent to the misfortunes of others. The girl absent-mindedly typed on the keys, trying to drown out the terrible thoughts. Exhausted, she leaned back in her chair in the empty office. The brunette tiredly covered her face with her hand, holding back the tears welling up in her eyes. And then she was finally swallowed up by a suffocating crimson abyss of heavy memories. Yu Han's sharp shout instantly pulled Lee Si-ah out of her daze. Yu Han asked excitedly if she had a headache again. The noise of the crowded restaurant around him drowned out his anxious voice. Se-ah quickly assured her friends that she had simply passed out for a while. Yu Han reminded her that last time it made her vomit. The guy sitting next to him added gloomily that only a few weeks had passed. A lone bottle of soju on the table was a reminder of the cause of their melancholy. The girl looked sadly to the side, plunging into the recent past. Before, the three of them would happily drink together, celebrating life and laughing. The dead Uni was smiling brighter than anyone else, holding a glass of beer. Memories mercilessly brought her back to that terrible day in the morgue. The pathologist sullenly asked Se-ah to confirm the identity of the deceased lying before them. Shedding bitter tears, the girl could barely squeeze out a quiet agreement. On the pale palm of the deceased Uni, the number carved by the killer was clearly visible. The bloodthirsty maniac nicknamed Number has already become the most talked about in the world. Yu Han asked in horror, was there really already 30 victims? A friend gloomily clarified that, taking into account imitators, the figure had exceeded 40. The girl muttered in fear that the world was going crazy and the police were doing nothing. The guy hissed angrily that such bastards should be executed immediately. Se-ah sighed resignedly, knowing that the murderer's death would not bring back the Uni anyway. The friends fell silent, looking at the gloomy Lee Se-ah with fear and confusion. Se-ah understood that it was foolish to simply react to murders that had already happened. The girl clutched her head, obsessed with the idea of looking for potential criminals in advance. She thought furiously that she needed to identify the maniacs and finish them off. Yu Han looked at her distant, frightening gaze with alarm. Se-ah admitted that this is all she's been thinking about lately. Soon the company left the restaurant, going out into the dark streets of the night city. As he was saying goodbye, his friend called out to Se-ah, causing her to turn around. Yu Han advised her to be careful and walk on the illuminated street. And then the guy hesitated, clearly wanting to tell her something else. Yu Han added softly that people willing to help were often unexpectedly close by. Se-ah just smiled sadly in response and thanked him. The boy smiled warmly, hoping that his timid hint had been understood. Meanwhile, from above, someone's silhouette was carefully watching the departing friends. A stranger in a black mask and with a burning eye was tracking CA. Horrific reports of completely unrelated victims flashed across the screens. The only thread of the investigation remained the bloody numbers carved into the bodies. On television, the profiler admitted that the motive of the insane criminal is still unknown. The girl furiously turned the page of the report with a photograph of the blood-soaked crime scene. She was terrified by the unprecedented scale of these chaotic killings. But she was not going to back down. After meeting the mysterious Number, only a few witnesses miraculously survived. Survivor Lee Ja-yeon wearily called the incident a pure accident. The girl remembered how they decided to have dinner that day. They simply turned onto an unfamiliar street, which became a trap for them. Suddenly, a bloody knife belonging to a crazed maniac flashed in the alley. In front of the frozen witness, the killer brutally dealt with the guy. Later, another survivor, Choi Chang-won, gave a statement to a reporter. The man insisted that they had chosen a busy and popular road, but suddenly he realized that there was not a soul left around. There was only one person walking behind, giving rise to an inexplicable, sticky horror. It seemed that the criminal knew in advance the tragic outcome of this chance meeting. The reporters stared at the survivor's face in shock, trying to understand his motives. It remained a mystery why the ruthless killer spared them. Why did Number release the witnesses, realizing the enormous risks to himself? The girl remembered how she waited in horror for her imminent death, but the maniac only silently approached his victim, who was trembling with fear. And then his cold, mad eyes flashed from under the hood. The witness woke up screaming from the terrible memory of Number 1. Meanwhile, the police hid the information, leaving the press without leads. The journalist thought hard about whether such madness was even possible in Korea, how a criminal continued to kill with impunity, dumping bodies and leaving no witnesses. The journalist returned to work and stared at the blank computer screen. Suddenly, she found that her work inbox was literally overflowing with emails. The girl froze in surprise when she opened one of the mysterious messages. The discovery shocked her, causing her to doubt the reality of the nightmare that was unfolding. With trembling fingers, she immediately began to dial a number on the phone. Reporter Lee Si-ah politely asked the recipient to discuss the letter. Meanwhile, a deep, dark night quickly descended on the Korean city. Se-a walked confidently down the street, rejoicing at such a successful turn of events. But from the darkness, an ominous silhouette was already silently watching the journalist. Se-a was absolutely sure that she was digging in the right direction. But the silence of the deserted alley was suddenly broken by the distinct alien sound of heels. A cold sweat appeared on the journalist's forehead from a sudden premonition of disaster. And then she realized that a long, ominous shadow was inexorably catching up with her. The girl frantically recalled the terrifying testimony of witnesses about deserted night roads. There really wasn't a soul around, and panic began to overwhelm Se-ah. She mentally begged herself to calm down, hoping for a simple, stupid coincidence. But the pursuer did not lag behind. Only one heavy step was heard behind. Turning around, the journalist saw in horror the rapidly approaching massive silhouette of a maniac. Suddenly, the stranger suddenly rushed forward, throwing himself at the victim, frozen in fear. Se-ah screamed as her attacker roughly pushed her onto the asphalt. A powerful heel suddenly emerged from the darkness, blocking the pursuer's path. The frightened journalist frantically crawled to the side, saving her life. The attacker swung his weapon in rage, intending to brutally deal with the witnesses. Suddenly, a brave stranger stepped between them, blocking the criminal's blow. The shocked girl instantly recognized her savior and shouted out Yoon Yoo-han's name. The guy grabbed the stunned maniac's hand tightly, not allowing him to move. Yoo-han commanded Se-ah to run and rushed away with her. As she ran, the journalist was puzzled as to where her acquaintance had come from. Yoo-han breathed heavily and tried to comprehend what kind of crazy bastard he was facing. The hooded pursuer ran quickly down a dark alley after the victims. The brunette shouted to her companion as she ran that they urgently needed to find a crowded place. The guy hoped that the maniac would definitely not be able to follow them in the restaurant. Ahead, a turn appeared that promised to be the shortest route to the main street. The girl turned sharply around the corner of a brick building at full speed, and then her eyes widened wildly from the approaching mortal horror. She braked sharply, realizing the enormity of their fatal mistake. The fugitive froze in confusion, noisily and heavily swallowing the cold night air. The trap was sprung, because what lay ahead was not the busy main street. The girl screamed in panic to Yoo-han that they had reached a dead end. Suddenly, Yoo-han swung the heavy pipe with fury. There was a dull thud and scarlet blood splattered in all directions. The guy walked away in cold blood, leaving behind the defeated, bloody body. The seriously wounded brunette lay helplessly sprawled on the cold asphalt of the alley. Yoo-han rudely called his accomplice a freak because of his slowness. Both accomplices stood gloomily over the motionless, bleeding body. The dying girl croaked out Yoo-han's name with her last strength. The hooded attacker breathed a sigh of relief, fearing wrath for his previous mistake. The victim's gaze began to rapidly fade from unbearable pain and shock, and then she realized that Uni had died at the hands of Nomer. Yoo-han just grinned sinisterly, glad to have the opportunity to shift the blame onto Nomera. Suddenly, the knife blade pierced the delicate skin with a nasty sound. The criminal mercilessly slashed the girl's arm, causing her to scream hysterically. Yoo-han stated with satisfaction that the dirty work was finally completely done. And then he warned in a chilling tone that after death, the victim belonged to him. The wounded brunette clenched her teeth furiously through tears and unbearable pain. The hooded accomplice leaned over cynically, intending to personally examine the dying girl. Suddenly, someone's silhouette appeared from the depths of a dark alley. Yoo-han turned around abruptly, cursing at the intruder in surprise and irritation. The stranger, looking down, brazenly ordered the bastards to get out of this dead end. Through the semi-darkness, his single eye, burning with a blue flame, gleamed ominously. At that moment, the mysterious figure of the stranger literally radiated a deadly aura. The hooded man instantly recognized him as number 41, and then the pursuer realized that the suspected killer was standing in front of them. Meanwhile, 3 hours earlier, the surviving girl was remembering Number. She sat in the cafe, giving a formal statement to the serious Detective Yang. The victim confidently stated that Nomer saved her and her entire family. Detective Yang asked sullenly whether she was talking about her ex-lover. The interlocutor smiled bitterly, remembering the horror that bastard had committed. Suddenly, the moment when the maniac was violently grabbing her came back to her mind. Detective Yang confirmed that the previous victim did indeed die at the hands of Number. The victim recalled how the mysterious savior suddenly appeared right behind the maniac. The detective sincerely did not understand why the girl considered the killer her faithful savior. The witness only smiled mysteriously, fully aware of the mortal danger of the situation. Investigator Yan stood there in complete confusion, silently pondering the strange testimony. And then the memories abruptly ended, returning the narrative to the dark, dead end of the night. The brunette lying on the ground understood that Number himself decides who will live. The Punisher, who had appeared through his mask, calmly announced that the suspected killer had finally been found. He moved forward slowly, frightening his accomplices with his ominous, confident gait. The hooded attacker swore in fear, gripping the heavy iron pipe tighter. The fair-haired guy called out to the departing stranger in fear, demanding that he get out immediately. Suddenly, the pursuer with the pipe screamed furiously, thinking the guy was deaf. At that very second, the masked brunette intercepted the dangerous weapon. With one sharp movement, he easily knocked the pipe out of the attacker's hands. This was followed by a crushing blow to the jaw, knocking the enemy off his feet. The defeated aggressor only cried out in pain from the unexpected and powerful rebuff. The fair-haired witness froze in shock, looking at the man lying on the ground, and then the beaten hooligan screamed hysterically from unbearable burning pain. Meanwhile, the savior's eyes mysteriously flashed with a dangerous neon glow. The system notification that popped up firmly stated that the first number did not belong to him. Terrible, bloody memories of a crying girl suddenly flashed before the brunette's eyes, and then the blonde froze in fear, enveloped in a suddenly flaring dark aura. In the hand of the unknown avenger, a deadly curved dagger of the fourth number instantly sparkled. The system ruthlessly identified the blonde as the main target for immediate destruction. The frightened guy frantically tried to understand what number they were talking about. Not believing his eyes, he watched in horror as his enemy made a furious dash. The blonde barely had time to scream in shock as the blade flew straight into his face. However, the guy reacted in time and thrust his sharp knife forward. At that very moment, the masked avenger's eyes flashed angrily with neon light. A frantic, deadly knife fight broke out in the middle of a dark, secluded alley. The blonde gritted his teeth in rage and surprise, noticing the enemy's sharp maneuver. The opponent instantly intercepted his hand, firmly blocking the counterattack with a knife. Suddenly, the brunette deftly knocked the guy's weapon out with his curved blade, and then he dealt the blonde a deep, crushing blow to the side. The wounded boy screamed hysterically from unbearable pain, bleeding scarlet. The masked avenger then delivered a lightning-fast, powerful spinning uppercut. A heavy kick completely knocked out the second attacking hooligan, who was trying to attack from behind. The beaten girl lying on the ground whispered in fear about 4 enemies. Meanwhile, the mysterious savior coldly stated that he had found the first number. His left eye glared with a predatory blue flame at the supposed killer. The masked savior breathed heavily, recalling the horrific details of the recent past. The complete lack of visible connection between the victims has always remained a mystery to the investigation. The criminal managed to hide from the vigilant police for an unnaturally long time and skillfully, and then a gang of ruthless, daring thugs appeared before him again. All the witnesses to the crimes gave exactly the same frightening testimony time and again. The victim recalled that the cops arrived immediately after the mysterious number left. In a dead-end alley, police cordoned off the murder scene and found the deceased's backpack. Inside were gasoline, butane, and a torch for committing another brutal arson. The interlocutor thought intensely about the incredible luck she had experienced in that fateful early time. Otherwise, she would never have crossed paths with the number near the house. The witness understood that without killing that bastard, the tragedy could not be avoided. Instead, her entire family would have burned alive in a terrible flame. Suddenly, the memories were interrupted, and the brunette in the mask stood menacingly in front of the blonde. And then the frightened guy frantically thrust forward his small folding knife. But the mysterious fighter instantly and easily dodged the pathetic attempt at an attack. With one powerful, precise movement, he pinned the attacker to the cold ground. The gaze of the formidable avenger through the slits of his black mask remained frighteningly indifferent. The brunette then delivered a lightning-fast, crushing kick straight to the enemy's jaw. The bloody knife whistled out of the limply unclenched fingers of the defeated blonde. Meanwhile, the beaten girl honestly admitted that her story sounded delusional. The outrageous thought was firmly lodged in my head. and I couldn't get rid of it. The girl was shocked and wondered if this mysterious number was really capable of seeing numbers. In a dark alley lay the man destined to become a future killer, and then the guy in the mask coldly stated the horrific number of his crimes. There was a sharp click as the electronic voice recorder in his hand turned on. It was the dead of night on November 14th, 2026. The hunter read out the personnel file of number 4, named Yoon Han. He calmly explained that by killing this scoundrel, he would save 4 innocent people. The cold blade of the curved sword mercilessly slid across the victim's bloody neck. The Punisher casually asked about his last wish, hearing only hoarse curses in response. The hunter kindly offered to deliver a dying message if it was feasible. The wounded boy only furiously coughed up blood, choking from impotent rage. The victim bared his teeth furiously, refusing to meekly accept his own inevitable death. And then the executioner silently hung over him like an ominous dark shadow. The guy wheezed stubbornly, not wanting to give up his life without a fight. The Punisher coldly asked if these were really his last words. Number 4 suddenly fell silent, staring wildly at his killer. Suddenly, a sharp blade pressed mercilessly against a defenseless, pale neck. Realizing the imminent end, the boy fearfully begged for mercy, asking to wait. There was a loud splash and crimson blood spurted out onto the wall. Yoon Han choked on blood, frantically trying to utter the last word. He desperately extended his weakening hand, pitifully begging to spare him at least once. However, the adamant executioner quietly apologized, declaring that it was impossible to overturn the sentence. And then, a powerful crimson fountain finally ended the sinful life of the killer. Blood slowly dripped from the dark, curved blade of the sword onto the cold ground. Meanwhile, the witness watched in shock as the lifeless body lay near the pole. A suspicious figure in a hood quickly disappeared into the depths of the alley. The hunter turned his back to the corpse indifferently, continuing to hold the bloody knife. On the pale palm of the deceased, the number 4 was clearly visible, carved in crimson. The girl excitedly asked if the Punisher was really not going to pursue the escaped guy. The guy snapped that number 1s were not targets for elimination. The witness objected furiously, mentioning the salvation of even one innocent soul. On an imaginary chessboard, a black pawn mercilessly crushed a white king. The masked hunter remained sullenly silent, lost in his dark thoughts. The girl admitted that such cruel logic is difficult for ordinary people to accept. And then she realized that this Punisher had his own rules. The brunette stepped forward decisively, unexpectedly offering the guy her help. Horrible memories of the dead, bloody victim flashed before her eyes. She passionately dreamed of being able to independently identify future villains and punish them. The arrest of a criminal and a schoolgirl crying on her knees came to mind. She admitted that she worked as a reporter and could safely hide him. The girl persistently assured him that she would definitely prove useful in his case. And then the Punisher gloomily asked if she had always thought so. Suddenly, he slowly reached his hand towards his black mask. The guy coldly said that then he no longer needed to hide his face. The masked hunter once again pressed the button on the recorder as usual. This time, he asked her in a chilling tone about her last wish. The brunette froze in fear, not believing her ears at the threat she heard. Her eyes reflected a wild, paralyzing horror from the realization of imminent death. An ominous, night-black aura suddenly flared up around the shocked girl. In a chaotic world, the boy believed that all human lives were equal. The police examined the body while the hero pondered the right to life. He decided to mercilessly destroy the numbers carved on the bodies of his victims. The hero merged with the faceless crowd to save innocent people. And for the sake of this great goal, he killed criminals in cold blood. Every television blared breaking news about an elusive serial killer. The cafe was buzzing with discussion about the latest brutal reprisal by the mysterious number. Do Hua froze in horror after hearing the frightening report on TV. Suddenly, the investigation discovered that there was a conspiracy behind the murders. In the gateway, Su Chan stared in fear at the guy with the bat. The announcer announced that the crime was most likely committed by a copycat nicknamed Mr. A. Do Hua ran to fulfill the finished order in fear after hearing the terrible news. Meanwhile, the black-haired guy at the table was carefully studying his personal notebook. He silently took a sip of hot coffee, lost in his thoughts. The news reported that such serial murders had never happened in the country before. The professor leafed through a notebook with sketches, recalling an old case from 1912. In his mind, he ordered a coffee with caramel in a strictly defined volume. The waitress politely took his order while he calculated the perfect timing. The man preferred to sit by the window, watching every visitor to the cafe. The girl brought a drink to the guy working on his laptop with a smile. The coffee shop window offered a clear view of the busy intersection near Cheongil Station. The whole point was that the guy was figuring out his enemies. Suddenly, a dangerous, chilling light flashed in his eyes. The city was filled with frightening dark silhouettes emitting an ominous, gloomy aura. The guy instantly fixed his gaze on the mysterious choker girl number 2. He coldly calculated the routes of the targets, excluding certain days and streets. Another suspicious, dark type came into his field of vision. Waitress Do Hua continued to deliver orders. Unaware that she was being followed, the hero seriously wondered if there were other targets left in the area, and then he firmly realized that he had not found everyone. And then, in the crowd, a 5th number, walking with a bodyguard, flickered ominously. Meanwhile, Do Hua was apologizing as she brought the sandwich and waffles to the customer. The waitress suddenly widened her eyes in surprise as she looked towards the window. But in fact, the mysterious black-haired guy had already disappeared without a trace. Only a cup of coffee and a wad of money remained at the empty table. Meanwhile, in the noisy bar, Hansen's gang loudly clinked glasses. The tattooed bandits celebrated wildly, calling for drinking to the bottom. The patrons sitting nearby glanced fearfully at the rowdy, drunken group. Suddenly, the thugs from the Gukche gang walked towards them with a swaggering gait. The frightened waiter tried timidly to calm the aggressive and noisy customers. The thrown bottles smashed against the wall with a crash, frightening the girls. The tattooed thug only brazenly snapped back at the unfortunate employee's remark. The frightened visitors hurried to leave this dangerous and noisy establishment. He continued to brazenly demand alcohol, spitting on decency and rules. The bandit with the tattoo on his neck irritably ordered more beer. The friend congratulated the bastard on successfully delaying his well-deserved sentence. The criminal grinned smugly as he recalled his dangerous drunk driving. He cynically mentioned the girl he had hit and her inconsolable father. The scoundrel sincerely did not understand what those around him wanted from him. The villain brazenly asked if he should return the injured leg back. The boy thought with disdain about the cripples who meekly accepted their miserable fate. A friend bragged at the bar about how quickly he intimidated a stubborn old man. And then the interlocutors laughingly recalled the bastards with a dog's will. Meanwhile, the night city was quietly plunging into an ominous gray haze. The people seeing him off cheerfully shouted after him, mocking his drunk driving. However, the tattooed driver only angrily sent the grinning joker away. Suddenly, a black car roared across the empty intersection. The guy gripped the steering wheel tightly, burning with rage and alcohol. Suddenly, his gaze narrowed furiously, fixating on the target on the road. And then, he pressed the gas pedal with all his might. Ahead, on the sidewalk, stood a group of peaceful pedestrians, unsuspecting. Suddenly, a car rushed straight towards them at great speed, and then the drunk driver suddenly closed his eyes in fear from a sharp shout. The dark stranger behind him harshly ordered the guy to turn the steering wheel immediately. The attacker held a knife to the driver's throat, demanding that he change course. The frightened blonde turned the steering wheel sharply, and the tires squealed madly. The car skidded, and frightened passers-by ran to the sides, screaming. Meanwhile, the mysterious criminal continued to strangle the stunned guy. The bandit coldly ordered us to drive forward and then turn to the outskirts. The driver gasped for air, angrily cursing his mad captor. The attacker explained that the flickering foreshadowed the imminent decrease of the other person's number. The blonde's eyes widened in shock at these frightening and incomprehensible words. The maniac ominously added that the driver would kill someone within 24 hours. And then the pursuer ordered the guy to immediately vacate the driver's seat. The man calmly began the countdown, giving time for the last words. The frightened driver gritted his teeth in panic, feverishly trying to figure out how to save himself. On the count of 2, the blonde suddenly intercepted the enemy's hand with the knife. The masked attacker was genuinely surprised by such a bold and furious counterattack. At that very second, the car, having lost control, swerved sharply to the side. Suddenly, an out-of-control black sedan skidded into the middle of the road at breakneck speed. However, the blonde only bared his teeth furiously, flatly refusing to give up without a fight. Suddenly, the attacker mercilessly grabbed the resisting guy by the hair. The bandit forcefully hit the driver's face against the steering wheel. Blood spurted from the victim's broken nose onto the dashboard. Taking advantage of the moment, the masked man ruthlessly took control of the car. The invader confidently pressed his booted foot directly onto the brake pedal. The sedan began to make crazy zigzags in the middle of the empty night highway. The out-of-control car almost rammed into a neat row of roadside trees, leaving black tire tracks on the asphalt. The car finally came to a stop. The bloody driver breathed heavily as the stranger calmly took his place. The stranger glanced at his watch, noting that the flickering had disappeared, but the number remained unchanged. The bleeding guy hoarsely demanded the name of the mysterious customer. The man gloomily realized the futility of preventing murder for the sake of a simple delay. Suddenly, the wounded driver's bloody hand furiously clutched a sharp knife. The blond man suddenly pounced on his neighbor with a mad cry, striking him. At that very moment, his eyes glazed over, losing their sparkle of life forever. The boy's lifeless body fell heavily onto the bloody seat. Meanwhile, the attacker calmly accepted the new instructions on his mobile phone. The black sedan smoothly pulled away, taking the dead man into the unknown. Meanwhile, a pale dawn was slowly breaking over the silent city block. The guy in black approached the checkout counter, where a friendly saleswoman greeted him cheerfully. He silently placed the bills on the counter, and the girl politely thanked him for the payment. As he walked down the stairs, the guy wished the girl, laden with boxes, a good day, and then he thought gloomily that he had gone too far, and it was time to make a decision. Meanwhile, behind him he heard heavy sighs and the steps of a stumbling stranger. She gave a fake smile from behind the boxes, apologizing and trying to just walk past. The guy suddenly remembered her image, immersed in his anxious thoughts. Suddenly, the stranger gasped in fear, losing her balance from the heavy load. The next moment, her foot abruptly slipped off the metal step of the staircase. With a loud scream, the girl finally flew down, and the boxes soared into the air. The black-haired guy froze, indifferently watching the sudden fall of the stranger. Suddenly, time seemed to slow down, capturing her desperate flight. A mysterious, glowing runic symbol instantly flashed in his eyes. Meanwhile, the frightened girl closed her eyes, preparing for a hard blow, but the guy instantly grabbed her hand, preventing her from falling. The rescued stranger stared at him in shock, stuttering from intense fear. An agitated saleswoman ran up from above, shocked by the dangerous scene she had witnessed. The victim quickly apologized to her colleague while she was examining the boy. The savior only remained sullenly silent, continuing to pierce the stranger with a heavy gaze. And then, he was stunned to realize, noticing a system number above it. The guy looked closely at her light, wavy hair, comparing the facts. Then he turned his gaze to the old, dark blue sneakers. And then he realized that he definitely remembered this employee. My thoughts were confused because system numbers never change after they appear. Meanwhile, the stranger awkwardly scratched the back of her head, complaining of a sudden headache. The saleswoman politely asked the guy to move on, promising to quickly clean up the stairs. But in fact, it was that very same Mo Ji-hyun who stood before him. Soon the colleague took out some eye drops, commanding the poor girl to open her eyes wider. The friend began to drip the medicine while the victim squinted comically and hissed. The girl at the table whined that this bill was making her even more stressed. Her friend forcibly opened her eyelid, ignoring Mo Ji-hyun's painful cry. Rubbing her tear-stained eye, the victim mentioned in surprise a strange, persistent pain. The interlocutor assumed it was just plain dryness, lazily propping her chin up with her hands. Suddenly, a guy in glasses approached them and offered to take the drops. Ji-hyun smiled happily, thanking her colleague profusely for his unexpected generosity. Meanwhile, television was reporting on the cover-up of a murder using fake numbers. A friend grumbled discontentedly about the dismal rerun of the program that was constantly playing on a loop, and the announcer continued to claim that this was the first incident of this scale. And then Mo Ji-hyun froze in fear when she heard the mention of the case from the 12th year. Suddenly, my friend sighed wearily, confessing to a terrible fear of the street. While the announcer was explaining the killer's true motives, Ji-hyun suddenly began to get ready. She cheerfully said goodbye to her colleagues, announcing that she was leaving first. The girl with a heavy backpack on her shoulders silently headed towards the exit. The remaining employees were surprised to assume that she had taken on a second part-time job. Meanwhile, Ji-hyun was already walking quickly along the dark night street. Behind her back, her colleagues noted her secrecy with a sigh. Suddenly, the girl froze, bent over from unbearable burning pain. Barely breathing, she convulsively tried to take a deep breath into her stomach. Covered in a profuse cold sweat, Ji-hyun exhaled slowly and heavily. Finally, the attack subsided, and the exhausted poor thing straightened up with relief in the middle of a deserted alley. Ji-hyun let out a sigh of relief, as this unexpected incident had really gotten on her nerves. And then she realized that she was terribly late, and rushed forward. Suddenly, a sharp and resounding slap from her boss interrupted all her thoughts. The man sternly warned Ji-hyun never to be late for her shift again. The girl obediently endured the reproaches, considering such rude treatment to be completely normal. She convinced herself that physical pain could be easily endured for the sake of work. Ji-hyun clung to this place, which was ready to bring her good money. However, in moments of complete helplessness, she only lightly patted herself on the shoulder. And despite the unbearable fatigue, the girl forced herself to put on a fake smile. Meanwhile, the customers called her, and she obediently ran to take the order. One of the customers enthusiastically dictated an order of 4 servings to Ji-hyun, but suddenly the guy at the table looked closely at the waitress's face. He asked in surprise if it was really Mo Ji-hyun standing in front of him. The girl instantly tensed up, feeling herself break out in a cold sweat. The guy shouted loudly throughout the establishment, surprised by such an unexpected meeting. His friend asked in bewilderment who exactly this modest waitress was. He explained to the company that they had attended the same high school together. At that moment, Ji-hyun silently prayed for them to shut up immediately. She was terrified of the mention of her father Mo Hong-chul's terrible deed. Suddenly, the guy gleefully announced to everyone that she was the daughter of that criminal. The people around began to whisper loudly and in surprise at this news. The girls at the next table asked in shock about Mo Hong-chul's daughter. Ji-hyun's eyes began to shine wildly, and an unbearable pain began in her head. The guy just grinned nastily, remembering her sudden disappearance at school. Other visitors immediately began to vigorously discuss shameful family secrets. However, Ji-hyun was already barely able to think clearly due to the extreme stress. The noise of the establishment suddenly merged into one continuous nightmare for her. The girl ran out into the street and huddled hysterically against the wall. She began to sob bitterly, clutching her head from the overwhelming horror. And then Ji-hyun thought with fear about someone's staring eyes. In the empty and quiet alley, only her quiet cry could be heard. And from the roof of a neighboring building, a stranger was watching her closely. The mysterious guy in the hood remembered all the features of the wanted woman perfectly well. Suddenly, he threw down a heavy cardboard box. Ji-hyun raised her head in fear, noticing the sudden fall of some object. And then suddenly, ominous neon numbers flashed before her eyes. The guy on the roof continued to ponder, fascinated about Mo Ji-hyun's identity. Meanwhile, the unfortunate girl could hardly hold back the tears that were welling up. She remembered the frantic flashes of hundreds of reporter cameras from her past, and the way a crowd of journalists attacked her arrested father with questions. The press furiously demanded answers as police tried to take Mo Hong-chul away. At home, the frightened mother covered her face as she listened to the terrible news about her murderous husband. Little Ji-hyun cried and pointed her finger at the TV screen in bewilderment. The old monitor emitted endless accusations against their once happy family. After a while, the phone rang and Ji-hyun's mother screamed into the receiver in shock. The girl was confusedly leafing through her old notebook, full of children's drawings. The woman argued furiously with her boss, demanding that he pay her back wages. From then on, Ji-hyun lived as if in an endless, drawn-out half-sleep. Probably the unfortunate girl simply did her best not to face the truth. At 14, she faced brutal bullying and a desk covered in graffiti. Angry shouts were heard from the director's office, demanding that the girl be thrown out immediately. The schoolgirl stood obediently by the door while the adults behind the walls scolded her father. Suddenly, an angry, dark-haired girl, accompanied by a man, quickly walked out of the office. Hae-jin turned around in fear at the sudden noise of the door opening. Suddenly, the enraged stranger slapped the girl hard in the face. Meanwhile, the interlocutor recalled that Hae-jin had lost her older brother at that time. The man added that the late brother clearly adored his younger sister. He was genuinely surprised that Hae-jin didn't know about their closeness. The girl quietly admitted that her father abandoned the family a long time ago, and then she remembered the crowd of reporters who had accompanied his sudden arrest. The man frowned and noted that her words sounded like nothing more than lame excuses. He added mercilessly what it was like for innocent victims like Hae-jin now. The girl asked in shock, did she really have to justify herself for anything? In a rage, Hae-jin screamed. Was she to blame for the sins of her murderous father? The interlocutor coldly retorted that one cannot ask for understanding in front of grieving people. Realizing the futility of arguing, Hae-jin only bitterly asked what she could do. And then she thought with tears, if books could help express the pain. Meanwhile, only one thing was persistently spinning in Ji-hyun's head. The boy clearly remembered the name of the dangerous serial killer, Mo Hong-chul. Meanwhile, on the street, the ordinary, peaceful life of ordinary passers-by was in full swing. And on a bench in the park sat a lonely girl, lost in thought. Suddenly, some strange symbols flashed menacingly before her eyes. In fact, The entire surroundings were suddenly filled with mysterious glowing numbers, and then she closed her eyes in fear from the sharp and unexpected flash. Soon the visions disappeared, leaving Hei-jin alone on the empty bench. She grabbed her head in panic, trying to comprehend this damn nonsense. Because of the colon, the girl at first sincerely mistook these strange signs for time, but judging by the chaotic size, it was clearly something completely different. Hei-jin sighed resignedly, wondering if she had caught some rare illness. The thought of a sudden illness made her gasp for breath. On the bench, her friend, 18-year-old Baek-min, suddenly called out to her. Hei-jin snorted condescendingly, calling the guy a complete and ignorant child. Baek-min reminded her with an offended expression that he had come solely at her personal request, and then he suddenly handed the girl some mysterious golden box. The schoolgirl was genuinely surprised why he was giving her a new hand cream. The guy raised an eyebrow in surprise, reminding her of her birthday tomorrow. He asked directly if she had really called him for something completely different. Meanwhile, Baek-min thoughtfully suggested having a bite to eat at a cool cafe. Suddenly, he looked closely and very attentively into her face. The friend exclaimed in fear, noticing bitter tears in Hei-jin's eyes. Hei-jin smiled sheepishly through her tears, perplexed by her strange reaction. She quickly sniffled and sincerely thanked her faithful friend for the gift. And then the terrible images of the slap and arrest came back to her mind. The schoolgirl quietly admitted that she had been going through an incredibly difficult time mentally lately. For a moment, there was silence, broken only by the light rustling of green leaves. Meanwhile, Baek-min suddenly remembered an old classmate named Kim Min-soo. The girl sighed bitterly, lamenting that she had to face him. She clenched her fingers convulsively, admitting that the memories made her feel very nauseous. In fact, Hei-jin still remembered those evil women. That day, angry Ajumas furiously demanded that they think realistically and drive away the killer. The girl bitterly recalled her difficult childhood and the constant doubts of those around her about her normality. Lack of money deprived her of an education, pushing her onto a slippery and dangerous path. But she desperately wanted to prove to the guy her ability to live happily. She desperately wanted to have a normal, fulfilling adult life as an ordinary person. She firmly stated that she would never follow in the footsteps of her murderous father. The companion only wearily covered his face, not understanding the reason for such evidence. But the girl only laughed ironically at his naive schoolboy perception of the world. Suddenly, the guy honestly admitted that he fell asleep during her monologue. Then he decisively suggested that we go have some fun and let out the accumulated negativity. Smiling, he extended his hand, challenging her to prove her right to a happy future. The embarrassed girl smiled warmly and offered the guy to choose a place to rest. And in response, I only heard a barbed joke about her poor performance. Soon, they were furiously hacking away at the computer club, shouting loudly. Then they had a blast singing karaoke, competing for the best scores. Later, the couple strolled leisurely through the city at night, lazily eating ice cream. The girl chatted cheerfully, enjoying the moment and the delicious cold treat. Suddenly, her gaze froze on something frightening ahead. The glowing neon numbers of the countdown flashed ominously before my eyes. Meanwhile, the guy walking in front continued talking about his own things carefree. And then he turned around in fear, noticing her sudden wild horror. She quickly lied, trying to convince her companion that she was completely fine. However, the guy internally suspected something was wrong, looking into her tense face. Meanwhile, they quickly mingled with the crowd, trying to escape unnoticed. The couple lay in wait, silently waiting for their pursuer to finally pass them by. Turning around, the guy breathed a sigh of relief, because they almost got caught. His partner immediately and rudely ordered him to shut up and stop being an idiot. And the spy's hidden camera continued to mercilessly record their every step. The creepy stranger gloomily examined the latest footage of our couple's happy walk. Through dark glasses, he angrily noted her surprisingly happy life. The video sent was cut off, but the sender pointed to her moving towards the bars. The man in glasses cynically called the strolling teenagers ordinary high school students looking for trouble. But then he revealed a fun fact about the date the video was filmed. But in fact, it was the day of remembrance of the 13th victim. He lamented that while some were burying their children, others were having fun. The situation seemed damn funny to him, and at the same time, completely disgusting. And then he drew a gloomy conclusion, declaring that God was dead. Meanwhile, the story moved to a quiet residential area with low-rise buildings. A gloomy Do-hwa slowly returned home, immersed in his thoughts. The boys were playing noisily in the street, teasing each other and laughing loudly. Suddenly at the gate, the police brutally grabbed the guy because of his constant complaints. Dohua merely waved it off while the neighbors heatedly discussed the day's crazy events. Soon, the guy decisively pressed the doorbell at the right apartment. An excited woman opened the door, greeting the guest with surprise and warmth. She apologized for the slight mess as Dohua politely took off his shoes. When he entered the room, he found Su-chan crying under the blanket. The girl immediately asked gloomily whether he had hidden his face well. She screamed in panic that their surveillance would lead to a new, huge problem. Dohua only listened silently and furiously to her grave accusations. A distraught Su-chan claimed that the pursuers had definitely tracked down her house. The guy carefully hugged her, quietly urging her to calm down and ignore the bastards. She sat resignedly on the floor, realizing the inevitability of the end of this protracted drama. The girl bitterly admitted that she felt betrayed by the stigma of being labeled a future criminal. Suddenly, the cruel reproaches of adults who predicted a crooked path for her appeared before her eyes. Tears streamed from her eyes from the unfair accusations of her right to happiness. And then the guy silently watched her bitter crying on the floor. He stood frozen in a daze, sincerely not understanding the reasons for her deep suffering. Meanwhile, a woman looked into the room and timidly called out to Mina. She pointed anxiously at the frightening crowd of suspicious men outside the window. Min calmly reassured her, citing the absence of classes due to exams. As she left for the night shift, the woman meekly thanked him for his help. The woman finally asked to call her immediately in case of any trouble. Suddenly, a ghostly timer lit up ominously above Ming's head. The girl sitting behind the door breathed out a quiet, resigned denial. Time was rapidly running out, bringing the inevitable denouement closer. She begged the mysterious numbers not to decrease, burning with helplessness. Meanwhile, the gloomy evening twilight was slowly thickening over the city. The guy looked into the empty refrigerator in search of some food. He decided to cook her dinner, despite the late hour. And then Min suddenly became wary, hearing a strange, suspicious rustling sound. Looking out the window, he noticed that the frightening crowd had disappeared without a trace. Min loudly warned Ji-hyun about his short trip to the store, but in response he heard silence. Assuming that the girl was fast asleep, suddenly the guy confidently pulled the handle of the front door, and then the door swung open, causing him to freeze on the threshold. The brazen, uninvited guests unceremoniously burst right into someone else's apartment. The nasty guy started calling out loudly for Ji-hyun with a grin. The attackers brazenly surrounded Min, suddenly recognizing him from the scandalous video. Rotten streamers laughingly admitted that they filmed trashy content live. A terrified Ji-hyun cowered on the floor in the dark room. Min shouted furiously, ordering the scoundrels to leave immediately under threat of police. The streamers brazenly moved forward, unceremoniously crossing the threshold of the apartment. Suddenly, someone's powerful hand blocked their path. An unfamiliar man loomed sternly over the stunned gang leader. He tried to break free, demanding that his hand be removed immediately. But the stranger only squeezed his hand tighter, demonstrating frightening strength. Min stared in complete shock at the savior who had suddenly appeared. The man gloomily recalled his deceased daughter, who studied at the same school. The guy listened in confusion to his sudden and strange revelations. In fact, the deceased Mrs. S was incredibly beautiful. And then Min thought with bitterness about the terrible injustice of the world. Suddenly, the enraged stranger struck the guy with all his might and delivered a powerful blow. Min fell to the floor, and the crazy man went to look for Ji-hyun. With a wild grin, he rejoiced that he had finally tracked down the daughter of his enemy. The Avenger, maddened by revenge, rejoiced, because his long-awaited turn had come. And then the guy tried with all his might to stop the raised hammer. However, the merciless weapon whistled and fell straight on Ming's head. The terrified streamers screamed in horror as they saw blood pouring onto the floor. Meanwhile, the wounded guy lay motionless near the half-open door of the room. The killer growled furiously, sincerely not understanding the reasons for such stubborn resistance. The fading Min meekly accepted his fate under the ticking of the melting timer. The gray-haired man shouted in rage that he would repay in exactly the same coin. And then the guy realized with regret that his time was inexorably running out. Meanwhile, the madman wildly widened his eyes, rejoicing at his correct vision. He remembered how every hour of his life turned into torture. Every minute, the damned timer before my eyes continued its eerie countdown. With every heartbeat, Ming's precious lifespan was rapidly diminishing. But the guy finally realized that the crowd simply needed the mythical daughter. They needed a man who could become an exact copy of his father. The psychopath raised a kitchen knife, ready to fulfill this insane desire. Suddenly, Someone's powerful gloved hand grabbed her wrist tightly. The frightened girl stared in shock at the blade that appeared right in front of her. The man in the suit looked at his savior with an evil grin. And then the stranger called out Mo Ji-hyun's name in an icy tone. The masked man asked if these would be his last words. Suddenly, he dealt a crushing blow, causing scarlet blood to spurt out. Thousands of viewers watched the brutal brawl live in shock. The broadcast host desperately shouted into the microphone, demanding that the violence stop. But Mo Ji-hyun screamed madly for the return of the suffering he had suffered. The crazy girl behind the man's back treacherously raised a huge knife over him. The sharp blade pierced the wall with a whistle, leaving deep cracks. The cameramen screamed in shock at the unexpected turn of events on live television. Meanwhile, a strong gloved hand intercepted the raised blade. The attacking girl froze in fear, unable to move. She wondered in confusion whether her father's bad heredity was to blame for everything, or perhaps the blind faith of those around me played a cruel joke. The crowd itself created this monster with its insane confidence. Suddenly, the masked guy delivered a lightning-fast, slashing blow. The cold fighter indifferently cut off that other people's squabbles were none of his business. Lonely drops of blood scattered spectacularly against the backdrop of his chilling gaze. The unconscious girl fell with a crash onto the wooden floor. Streamers screamed in horror when they saw their accomplice lying on the floor. The next second, someone's powerful blow shattered the smartphone screen. The masked man conducting the cleanup coldly and silently assessed the situation. The frightened operators backed towards the exit, desperately calling on each other to run. They cursed this stream, because of which they got involved in a deadly matter. The remaining man in the suit stood frozen in confusion in front of the creepy stranger. Meanwhile, the wounded girl wheezed helplessly in a pool of her own blood. Mo Ji-hyun, who had lost his mind, stared wide-eyed with impotent anger. He screamed hysterically about his insane need to commit murder, and the defeated accomplice only sighed quietly and heavily on the floor. Immediately, the masked fighter grabbed Mo Ji-hyun's neck with a death grip. He apologized in an icy whisper, adding that this also concerned him. The man in the suit wheezed as the noose around his neck tightened completely. Suddenly, Mo Ji-hyun's lifeless body collapsed limply onto the floor. The girl, lying in blood, whispered her question with the last of her strength. The savior turned around, casting his frightening and mysterious gaze upon her. He noted with annoyance that the rusty blade had prevented him from killing immediately. The girl's eyes widened in fear, suddenly realizing something completely shocking. She remembered the eerie, ghostly numbers hanging over the heads of passers-by. And then it dawned on her that this guy could see them too. The masked man peered into the darkness, noticing the mysterious targets. And then the bloody girl was cruelly ordered to take the lives of 4,000 more people. On TV, they reported that the only connection between the victims was the cutout numbers. The announcer added grimly that the criminal's motives and the meaning of the numbers remain a mystery. The family screamed in rage at what kind of scum the child would grow up to be with such terrible genetics. Memories came flooding back, and the frightened girl swung the huge kitchen knife in panic. And in my head, the order to destroy thousands of people continued to echo cruelly. The wounded heroine froze in shock, frantically trying to take at least a breath of air. Suddenly, she realized that this number killer and all the victims were exactly like her. The poor girl's strength finally left her. Her consciousness became clouded, and she felt terribly dizzy. Through his fading gaze, the boy saw a timer counting down his final moments. The numbers were melting away inexorably, and only 50 minutes remained before his death. Meanwhile, the wounded Ji-hyun desperately screamed that she would not let Min die, and the ruthless killer standing above her gripped his sharp blade tighter. The dark silhouette coldly asked if these were her last words before death. And then Ji-hyun gathered the rest of her strength for the final, important question. In a trembling voice, she asked why the man had survived. In fact, she herself did not really understand the real reason. The swordsman was genuinely surprised by such a strange, dying curiosity from the bleeding girl. Then suddenly, he explained that the dead guy simply wasn't number one. He cynically added that this would not have prevented someone's death. The unfortunate girl's consciousness was completely lost in the face of such a terrifying truth. The last chance fell from her weakened fingers with a quiet thud, and right at that fateful moment, the killer suddenly raised his blade. The wounded Ji-hyun finally lost her strength and collapsed unconscious. The masked swordsman stood silently, staring intently at his fallen victim. Suddenly, his eyes widened wildly in shock and sudden realization. A powerful, mysterious aura suddenly sparkled around Ji-hyun's unconscious body, and then the guy jumped back in fear from this unexpected flash. Meanwhile, the girl, enveloped in a mystical light, quietly continued to rave. The masked guy froze in shock, remembering someone's familiar piercing gaze. The destroyed classroom where he had made his vows to the girl came back to him. Then he resolutely promised to do this personally for the sake of universal salvation. The tearful young man vowed to complete the mission if the numbers did not decrease. Reality washed over him again, causing the killer to grip the handle of the sharp knife tighter. Suddenly, a man came rushing from behind with a mad cry, thirsting for reprisal. The enraged attacker swung at the masked guy with all his might. The crazy aggressor screamed furiously that this prey belonged only to him. The swordsman deftly blocked the blow, while the madman demanded to cede the right to kill. And then the attacker howled hysterically, begging not to take away his target. The masked man was shocked to realize that the countdown on the timer had suddenly increased. At that very moment, he launched a lightning-fast and incredibly brutal counterattack. The stunned opponent's heavy hammer flew out of his hands with a whistle. With a powerful and precise kick, the swordsman pinned the madman to the floor. And then the guy tried to calm down, remembering that something similar had happened before. He decided to deal with the mystery later, adapting to his changed fate. Without further ado, the cold-blooded avenger instantly intercepted the enemy's dropped weapon. In fact, he had only one main task left. With a dull thud, the swordsman mercilessly crushed the head of the defeated mad attacker. Suddenly, the silhouette of a smiling, happy girl flashed before his eyes. The bleeding man whispered Sojin's name with his last strength. Suddenly, the silence of the night was cut by the furious howl of approaching police sirens. The sound of flashing lights echoed throughout the darkened neighborhood. The masked guy stood frozen in the corridor among lifeless, bloody bodies. The wounded brunette was breathing heavily, clinging with all his might to his slipping consciousness. Meanwhile, Do Hua lay unconscious with a bloody face. The attacker, standing in the shadows, grimly stated that he simply had no words. And then Sojin remembered in horror the endless circle of deaths. But in reality, this terrible nightmare has returned to the beginning again. And now the masked guy was desperately trying to figure out her secret. The guy reluctantly resigned himself to the inevitable, mentally agreeing to continue acting. Meanwhile, police cars roared past the brick building. Someone's black car suddenly took off, its tires screeching deafeningly. The strangers silently carried the wounded and bleeding boy away. Do Hua sat in the passenger seat, completely unconscious. The car sped along the empty night highway at great speed. Suddenly, the blonde opened his eyes sharply, staring in front of him in shock. The guy looked around in fear, completely not understanding where he was, and then he winced sharply from a sudden burning pain in his neck. Confused, Do Hua carefully felt the fresh marks of strangulation with his fingers. Su Chang stepped timidly onto the cold concrete floor with her bare foot. The car brought her to some abandoned and dilapidated hangar. The shocked girl looked around in fear, not understanding what kind of place this was. Suddenly, Su Chang remembered that she was at home with Min yesterday. The heavy, confident steps of an unknown person were heard behind. The girl turned around in fear at this sudden, frightening sound. The same guy in black calmly walked out of the shadows towards her. Horrible memories of past deaths immediately flashed through her mind. The brunette frowned and noted that she had woken up much earlier than he thought. Su Chang suddenly jerked to the side, desperately trying to escape from him. Suddenly, a long black rope rushed straight towards her. Su Chang let out a startled cry as the strong noose tightened tightly around her waist. With a light movement of his hand, the guy pulled the fugitive back to the car in a second. The kidnapper calmly ordered her not to waste her energy and to stay inside. And then he confidently sat down in the back seat of the huge van. The stranger sullenly promised to leave her alive, provided that complete silence was observed. A frightened Su Chang breathed heavily, realizing that her hands were now tied. Inside the car, rows of grisly metal instruments lay neatly on shelves. The captive froze in horror, looking at the frightening arsenal behind her. And then she met the cold gaze of the brunette through the mirror. And then Su Chan realized that she had met this guy before. It seems that he was the mysterious serial killer Number. The girl realized with horror that she was seeing the total number of his victims. A terrible future, drenched in the blood of innocent people, flashed before her eyes. The terrifying figure of having to kill 4,000 people came to mind. The frightened captive muttered this terrible number out loud in shock. Meanwhile, the guy calmly clarified the exact figure of 4,326 people. Suddenly, Su Chang shuddered in fear at his chilling words. The kidnapper grimly corrected himself, stating that there had already been so many victims. The numb girl asked him in confusion about this strange past tense. Someone's pale hand confidently reached out to the sharp, curved blades. The guy gloomily asked his interlocutor if she remembered the reason for saving number 1. Then she was almost dying and heard this bitter truth from him. Losing consciousness, the girl herself put up a 1. As if begging for a chance to survive. His shocking confession left the unfortunate woman in the car speechless. The guy added that the boy remained alive only thanks to her actions. Suddenly, the girl thought with bated breath what a relief it was. As it turned out, that guy was originally supposed to finish off the poor kid, but she desperately changed her fate by preventing this brutal and bloody murder. And then a completely new, unpredictable fate began for the surviving man. The figure rose, making the enraged man the new suspect. The shocked girl confusedly went over the words about the alleged killer in her head. Suddenly, she realized the true reason for Ming's miraculous rescue. The guy calmly admitted that he personally finished off that crazy man. After this statement, a deathly, heavy silence reigned in the car. Meanwhile, she was discussing the unchanged figure of the unconscious man. The black-haired guy sternly reminded her that she herself was preparing to commit murder. These merciless words made the unfortunate woman shudder and freeze in fear. It doesn't matter at all whether she then inflicted fatal knife wounds on the victim. The intentions did not change, even if the body was dismembered or the person was kept locked up. The chosen method will change absolutely nothing for the one for whom it is predestined. The one who is destined must kill a specific number of people. The guy swung sharply, causing the girl to cower in fear and submission. He then asked why the absolute numbers were decreasing only for her. The dark silhouette firmly declared that she now belonged entirely to him. The girl bit her lip in resignation, not knowing how to react to the threat. The heavy van took off with a deafening whistle of its wheels. Picking up speed, they sat silently in the oppressive semi-darkness of the cabin. Finally, she timidly asked where exactly they were taking her now. The driver coldly stated that they had no specific destination, but then he added harshly that now she would always be with him. The driver sternly asked her if she still didn't understand anything. The unfortunate woman asked in fear what would happen if she refused to follow him. The guy calmly handed her the phone, noting that the choice was hers. He added that the escape would also be her personal, free decision. But if she escapes, she will immediately be harshly suspected and persecuted. Those around her will inevitably force her to commit murder, pushing her towards a new, terrible fate. The black-haired guy mockingly asked her what she would do now. Suddenly, an inner voice screamed desperately, urging her to ignore these words. The girl lowered her head in resignation, quietly whispering about the possibility of giving up. The guy asked in surprise if she wanted to go to her place. She explained in a confused manner that she needed to pick up her personal belongings and see her mother. In a panic, the girl tried to figure out how to make him fall for this lie. To her utter amazement, the stern driver unexpectedly and easily agreed. The heavy van instantly turned off the highway towards the busy city. Soon, the car stopped near a nondescript multi-story building in a dark alley. Pulling down her deep cap, the frightened heroine carefully wandered down the dim corridor. She desperately hoped that the official police investigation had already been fully completed. Meanwhile, the guy promised to park in a place where there are absolutely no street cameras. Suddenly, she froze at her door, noticing yellow caution tape. The yellow tape tore surprisingly easily. Do-hwa carefully stepped over the threshold of the ransacked apartment. He frantically packed his jacket, ramen, and money into his bag. Suddenly, Do-hwa realized the need to run as fast as possible. The guy was panicking and trying to figure out where to go after escaping. The heavy footsteps of an unknown person outside the door made him freeze. And then he asked himself in fear where to go next. A creepy silhouette watched him closely from the dark doorway. Meanwhile, a suspicious black minivan was parked in the courtyard of the house. The pursuer mentally promised to take her back if she returned, and then Do-hwa flinched from a sharp, suspicious noise. Meanwhile, Su Chang sat in the car, thinking about escaping, and in the apartment, an ominous silhouette was tightly clutching a rose in his hand. The guy was feverishly trying to figure out what else he needed to take with him. Suddenly, Do-hwa turned around in fear at the steps behind him. An unknown person raised a broken glass bottle over his head to strike him. The frightened boy instinctively covered his head with his hands, expecting a crushing attack. The deadly weapon froze in the air at the very last moment. The attacker froze in shock, suddenly recognizing Mo Ji-hyun in front of him. A stunned Do-hwa slowly opened his eyes, not believing his salvation. The boy couldn't help but cry out in relief when he saw Mo Ji-hyun alive. A frightened Ji-hyun asked in shock where Min had even come from. Min dropped the dangerous bottle fragment in fright and hurried to apologize to her. And then he admitted that he returned for his things after the police left. Then he noticed the open door of the apartment and became wary. Min was afraid of the return of those madmen and became very worried about Ji-hyun. Suddenly, the girl carefully touched his wounded face with her palm. The guy was very embarrassed by this unexpected and tender gesture. Ji-hyun burst into tears, blaming herself for all of his terrible injuries. Meanwhile, Min hastened to reassure her, calling the wounds trivial scratches. Min, in a rage, demanded to know what had happened here. The guy added that journalists were gossiping about her. Ji-hyun shuddered at the words about being labeled an accomplice to a crime. Suddenly, Min remembered the business card he had received from the investigator today. The guy suggested calling him and honestly telling him the whole truth. The girl just lowered her head guiltily in front of the packed travel bags. And then Min fell silent in surprise, realizing a terrible guess. And then the guy asked in shock what these things were. Ji-hyun remained silent and gloomy, not knowing how to justify her escape. Suddenly, she turned around decisively, ignoring his request to wait. Min rushed after her, desperately asking where she was going. But Ji-hyun bitterly reproached him for his stupid pretense. And then the girl reminded him that he had seen the stream himself. Min stood stunned, unable to find words to justify himself. Memories took him back to the day when the doctor blocked his way. Sitting on his hospital bed, the boy only wanted to repay the kindness. He replayed the horrific footage of the attack on Ji-hyun on his smartphone. Suddenly, the smartphone screen went dark after a loud scream. The doctor grinned slyly, mockingly asking about the continuation of the video. The sinister hypnotist smoothly launched a pocket pendulum yo-yo before his eyes. The man calmly twirled a yo-yo, claiming his phone was broken and his stream was interrupted. The interlocutor in the hospital room froze in shock at the news about the mysterious number. The investigator thought gloomily about Ji-hyun's disappearance and the pile of unanswered questions. The bandaged guy listened sullenly to the public accusations against the girl. And then the detective, with a grin, urged him to understand the police's tough stance. Meanwhile, hurried steps were heard on the dark street under the light of a lantern. Ji-hyun walked away with the suitcase, ignoring the guy's desperate cry to stop. The wounded guy screamed furiously after him, demanding a confession to the man's murder. He sincerely did not believe in her guilt and demanded answers. Suddenly, he reminded her that the police would start putting pressure on her because of her father. He desperately shouted that she didn't need to justify herself to society. The guy insisted that the crowd's stupid rumors were of no importance. Suddenly, Ji-hyun, in tears, angrily interrupted his speech. Her sharp scream made the guy fall silent, frightened and stunned. Meanwhile, she bitterly admitted that it was not a matter of fatigue at all. The girl covered her face with her hands, remembering that fateful, nightmarish moment. At that moment, she was ready to do absolutely anything to save him. With tears of madness, she confessed to her conscious desire to kill. But in fact, the crowd turned out to be right. The fate of a murderer awaits her. The guy froze in horror at her terrible final confession. A bloody image of Number, who could see mysterious numbers, surfaced in her memory. Ji-hyun cried bitterly, realizing that without him, she would have done something irreparable. The girl slowly turned around and took a heavy, decisive step to the side. She quietly apologized and slowly walked away, taking her suitcase with her. The wounded boy desperately shouted after her, demanding that she stop immediately. Ji-hyun begged him through tears not to risk his life anymore. Suddenly, the guy angrily reminded her of her hospitalized aunt, who was suffering because of her. These cruel words made the departing girl freeze in shock and pain. She immediately remembered the inconsolable crying of the unfortunate woman in front of the TV. And then Ji-hyun resignedly admitted that she now had to disappear. The boy was shocked into silence, taken aback by her firm reluctance to repeat her father's fate. Ji-hyun burst into tears, confessing her deepest desire to see her mother. Finally, she turned around and took a confident step into the night darkness. The bandaged guy just looked after her sullenly, following her suitcase with his eyes. Suddenly, someone's hand decisively opened the door of a car parked nearby. The girl obediently sat in the passenger seat next to the gloomy, dark-haired driver. The man coldly reproached her for the delay, admitting that he suspected an escape. Ji-hyun reminded him of the rule of eliminating future murderers in advance. The brunette sternly replied that only he could do this dirty work. And then she realized the true, frightening meaning of her being next to him. The girl firmly promised not to kill anyone again, to which she received consent. Meanwhile, the car sped along the highway towards a new, foggy dawn. Ji-hyun sat strapped in, lost in her heavy, gloomy thoughts. Suddenly, a familiar yo-yo suddenly shot up in someone's hands. Ominously, an investigator with a toy entered an abandoned room with scattered things. The companion confirmed that the wanted girl was alive, but was hiding the reason for her escape. The man inquired about checking the street cameras and demanded immediate recordings. And then he slowly raised his hand, holding some important photograph. The photo showed a smiling Ji-hyun wearing a work apron. The detective's red eye flashed ominously, declaring the need to hurry. The fair-haired boy was driving in the car, thinking about a valuable clue. Meanwhile, someone's heavy footsteps were heard in the dim, eerie corridor. The frightened girl frantically dialed the number and reported the emergency. Her eyes widened in horror as she gave the exact address. In tears, she begged the police to come quickly, because the stalker had returned. Suddenly, a shadow actually appeared behind the door of apartment 305th. The dispatcher acknowledged the call, but the unfortunate woman was only angry at the cops' helplessness. She screamed in panic that someone could die due to their inaction. The operator calmly replied that the maniac wandering around the entrance had not yet done anything. This absurd answer finally caused the girl to burst into a furious scream. The fair-haired boy was driving in the car, thinking about a valuable clue. Meanwhile, someone's heavy footsteps were heard in the dim, eerie corridor. The frightened girl frantically dialed the number and reported the emergency. Her eyes widened in horror as she gave the exact address. In tears, she begged the police to come quickly, because the stalker had returned. Suddenly, a shadow actually appeared behind the door of apartment 305th. The dispatcher acknowledged the call, but the unfortunate woman was only angry at the cops' helplessness. She screamed in panic that someone could die due to their inaction. The operator calmly replied that the maniac wandering around the entrance had not yet done anything. This absurd answer finally caused the girl to burst into a furious scream. The companion simply waved it off, adding that the taste of the food was not important at all. In his opinion, the main thing is an optimized and clear routine. The guy chewed silently, realizing the futility of arguing with this dry person. In fact, this strange guy was a dangerous serial killer. 4 days passed, but the hostage only sadly rode with him. The number warned her not to wander the streets without a reason. He told the girl to run if she didn't return by 1 o'clock in the morning. And then she remembered that the maniac always acted the same way. The predator watched the crowd from above for a long time, choosing the potential killers as targets. Everything happened exactly the same as in the diner where she worked. She remembered how joyfully she served happy families in her cafe, and then kind conversations with regular customers came to mind. The girl sighed heavily, plunging into her dark thoughts about the past. She clenched her fist tightly, doubting the correctness of her current actions. In fact, she was desperately trying to understand her own hidden desires. Meanwhile, the hostage quietly fell asleep in the passenger seat of the locked car. Suddenly, she woke up sharply from a terrible noise and wild fear. In front of her stood a half-naked number, covered in splashes of fresh blood. The killer casually threw his dirty, bloody clothes right onto the seat. Smelling the pungent smell of blood, the frightened girl silently cowered in the corner. Overcoming her fear, the girl asked number directly about the number of his victims today. Calmly putting on clean clothes, the killer briefly replied that he had killed 2 people. He added coolly that he had to deal with them today. Suddenly, the girl developed a sharp and unbearable headache. The number immediately reacted to the strange cry, staring at its companion. Overcoming the sharp pain, she hastened to lie that everything was fine, and then her right eye flashed ominously with a bright golden light. The stunned hostage saw ghostly numbers hovering above her partner's head. Looking at the mysterious glow, she suddenly realized the frightening nature of what was happening. Based on past visions, these numbers represented the remaining time of his life. The brunette suddenly called out the name of Mo Ji-hyun, who was standing in front of him. The guy suddenly hovered behind her and asked if she saw something. The girl became extremely nervous and asked again in fear, not understanding the essence of his question. She pressed herself into her seat, trying to comprehend what exactly she was supposed to see. There was a heavy pause, and the black-haired man turned away gloomily, plunging into silence. Later, his companion honestly admitted that she had no need to hide the truth from him. The atmosphere became tense, because the guy had a very bad and ominous feeling. And then the memories suddenly switched to his previous stern look. Meanwhile, some young man anxiously asked if everything was okay with him. However, the brunette simply waved it off casually, lying that nothing special had happened. The boy clutched his head and was surprised by the sudden, strong blurriness in his eyes. In fact, He had already guessed everything long ago and quietly cursed. The footage changed to a peaceful cityscape with high-rise residential buildings. The black van stood in a narrow alley as passers-by walked peacefully past. The companion warned the girl that he would go shopping for about 2 hours. Left alone in the car, she suddenly noticed people passing by, and then her gaze became clouded, and her pupils flashed with an ominous bright light. Suddenly, strange glowing numbers appeared in front of her above the passers-by. The girl remembered that for each person, the right number decreases differently. It turned out that these mysterious numbers show the exact time until inevitable death. She clearly remembered that the meaning of 331 meant 3 hours and 31 minutes. If we continue to calculate in this way, the value 302 means 3 days, 2 hours. The girl seriously wondered whether months and days would be displayed in future calculations. And then she turned her gaze to the trio passing by. The three were talking animatedly, completely unaware of the danger looming over them. Moji Hyun was suddenly horrified by the ominous numbers above their heads. The brunette from that group suddenly drooped and sighed heavily, exhaustedly. The friend became nervous and asked excitedly why she had become so pale. Hearing the question about possible hunger, the exhausted girl only laughed wearily. The poor guy's gaze became completely lifeless, and cold sweat rolled down his face. Suddenly, the memories were transferred to the room where the frightened poor thing covered her ears. Behind the locked door, someone was raging furiously and demanding that someone call immediately. The girl covered herself with a blanket while the madman threatened to destroy everything and commit suicide. He continued to frantically break into the locked room, shouting insane threats. The unfortunate woman wept bitterly in horror, tightly clutching the edge of her hood. Suddenly, an enraged psychopath promised to brutally kill her entire family. And then the ominous numbers above the passers-by began to tick clearly and frighteningly. Moji Hyun stood frozen as she watched time melt away over the doomed trio. The girl exhaled in fear, unable to believe the nightmare that was unfolding. Meanwhile, a silhouette was confidently approaching the unsuspecting people from behind. The hooded stranger walked confidently down the stairs, following the peaceful passers-by. From afar, a black-haired guy watched this suspicious guy silently and coldly. The man swayed as he walked, emitting an ominous dark aura around himself. The brunette with a glowing blue eye grinned, finally finding his target. Meanwhile, the ghostly timers above the doomed trio continued to tick relentlessly. The girl behind the wheel was completely confused, noticing an incredible detail in these numbers. And then she realized that absolutely everyone was displaying the same numbers. Mo Ji-hyun frantically tried to figure out what exactly this eerie coincidence meant. It turned out that the unfortunate passers-by had only 8 hours and 31 minutes left to live. At this point, the company happily went shopping, completely unaware of the trouble. He was tormented by the difficult question of what he could do alone. The wounded boy was fading away before our eyes, leaving no hope for salvation. The girl in the beret sank into a gloomy, oppressive silence out of hopelessness. Suddenly, she swung open the car door, deciding to take a desperate step. Throwing aside her cowardly doubts, she rushed forward after the departing group of people. The black-haired guy turned around sharply, noticing some movement out of the corner of his eye. At first, he was surprised to think that Mo Ji-hyun had decided to run away, but then his gaze turned cold, because she was clearly pursuing someone. Meanwhile, 2 suspicious strangers stood in front of the trash bins. A little further down the alley, 2 more dark figures were quickly moving away, but then his eye flashed ominously with a mysterious blue flame. Mo Ji-hyun confidently walked ahead, straight through the crowd. From the darkness of the alley, the silhouette of a guy in a voluminous hoodie suddenly appeared. The black-haired pursuer grinned contentedly, having finally found his cherished target. Meanwhile, in the busy shopping center, ordinary life was in full swing. The girl sighed tiredly while her friend was enthusiastically choosing a pink sweater for her. Suddenly, her mobile phone rang insistently, interrupting her shopping. Eun-seo cursed in irritation, quickly detaching yet another annoying call. The companion asked why she didn't simply report it to the police. She gloomily explained that some psycho had leaked the number online. The man, confused, suggested that she might have done something to seriously offend the offender. Eun-seo snapped in her heart that she wished she knew the reason for such meanness. The girl resignedly decided to wait here until the long-awaited move. Mo Ji-hyun sat nearby, listening attentively while sipping her coffee. The thought of a typical crazy stalker was spinning around in Mo Ji-hyun's head. Meanwhile, she remembered the dead family and was horrified by the scale of the tragedy. The situation seemed blatantly unfair to her, because the pursuer looked very young. Suddenly, a black-haired guy appeared silently behind her, causing her to scream wildly. Clutching her heart in fear, she was outraged by his sudden ominous appearance. Getting straight to the point, the uninvited guest sternly demanded that visible figures be named. He added that it was stupid to hide, because she was tracking those three. Mo Ji-hyun clenched her fists in fear at these insightful words. The girl became nervous and asked, dumbfounded, how the guy knew everything. The stranger admitted that he, too, was painfully familiar with her intense gaze. The guy reminded her that she behaved unnaturally in mortal danger. She realized too quickly, suspiciously, what these mysterious numbers meant. Mo Ji-hyun frantically considered whether she should tell him the whole truth. Suddenly, Min-so's friend called out loudly, interrupting the tense conversation. The stalker tried to stop the girl from leaving, persistently demanding that they continue the conversation. The frightened Mo Ji-hyun quickly shouted that she agreed to confess everything. She promised to tell us absolutely all the details right on the way. Meanwhile, the two of them quickly walked through the buzzing crowd. The guy realized gloomily that they were really talking about life expectancy. Mo Ji-hyun walked obediently next to her gloomy companion. The girl hesitantly recalled that during the day the timer showed a little over 8 o'clock. She added doomedly that the entire unfortunate family would die that evening. Then, suddenly she mentioned an overheard conversation about a crazy stalker. The companion confidently stated that this pursuer was definitely a brutal killer. Mo Ji-hyun froze in fear, wondering where he got such confidence from. And then the guy pointed to the pursued stranger standing on the balcony. The girl in the beret stared at the screen in fear, realizing the terrible cause and effect relationship. A gloomy guy in a burgundy hoodie and mask silently watched her from above. Realizing the danger, she turned sharply and ran away down the corridor. But then the brunette intercepted her, rudely asking where she was going. The girl screamed in fear that she needed to urgently warn the others about the stalker. The black-haired guy just coldly listened to her panicked babble about calling the police. He interrupted her sternly and reminded her menacingly that he had already told her everything. The girl froze in shock, completely confused about his true motives. Meanwhile, below, a passerby accidentally ran into a man with a scream. Having scattered her things, the frightened poor thing began to frantically apologize to the stranger on her knees. The couple above stared in confusion at the sudden noise in the shopping center. Below, passersby watched in confusion as the commotion over the fallen items occurred. The injured girl assured the man who rushed to help that everything was fine. Suddenly, her gaze fell on the savior, and her eyes widened in horror. Her shrill scream echoed throughout the hall, causing the masked man to flinch. Meanwhile, the people above began to bustle about, trying to understand the reason for such terrible panic. She screamed in tears, pointing at the man and calling him that freak. The crowd immediately began to buzz, frightened and wondering how this lunatic had even gotten there. The girl in the beret watched in shock as the scandal erupted below. The brunette gloomily stated that now everyone around knew about the stalker's presence. The girl thought with fear that their lives would really be prolonged because of this scream. An incredible noise arose below, accompanied by a strange, ominous glow. The clock on the display case continued its inexorable and monotonous ticking, and then she realized with horror that the fatal numbers remained the same. The invisible silhouette took a step, confirming the inevitability of the coming finale. Fate can't be changed. That guy will kill them in exactly 7 hours. In the old sketch, the stalker looked exactly like a guy in a mask. Suddenly, the suspect in the hoodie screamed furiously, trying to defend himself against the accusations. Meanwhile, the mysterious killer continued his leisurely, confident walk. The timer stopped at 3:30, inexorably counting down the last hours. The brunette calmly noted that there was no need to rush and that he could calmly prepare. The girl in the beret stared at him in fear, not understanding his calmness. Suddenly, he ordered Mo Ji-hyun to secretly follow those people. He added that the stalkers should not notice her, causing her doubts. The girl asked, confused, how they would meet, since she didn't have a SIM card. The guy then ominously admitted that he had attached a hidden GPS tracker to her. Mo Ji-hyun, shocked, screamed in horror, not believing his impudence. His words gave her goosebumps, because he promised to let her go. But the brunette only ironically reproached her for trying to help everyone herself. The girl fell silent, confused, because no one had really asked her about this. The gloomy brunette irritably suggested that she either express her dissatisfaction now or act alone. Mo Ji-hyun clutched her head, still not understanding the need for murder. She logically assumed that the victim would only need to lock the door and call the police. The black-haired guy only remained mysteriously silent, lowering his head in deep thought. And then he cynically explained that the police only react to crimes that have already been committed. The girl froze in shock, realizing the cruel truth of his words. Meanwhile, the guy added that a sophisticated maniac always carefully plans his attack. In fact, the crazy stalker was already busy collecting dossiers on his future targets. The brunette bared his teeth angrily, realizing that a simple locked door certainly wouldn't stop the psycho. At the same moment, the maniac was frantically typing on the computer keys in the darkness. A detailed plan of a Type A apartment glowed dimly on the computer screen. Meanwhile, outside the window, a multi-story residential complex loomed gloomily. It was just past 10 in the evening, and there was very little time left. Suddenly, a man ran out of the apartment door excitedly towards the police. He asked the departing law enforcement officers in confusion if they were really abandoning him. The officer awkwardly scratched the back of his head, trying to somehow justify their hasty departure. He promised to immediately put an electronic bracelet on the stalker after his capture. The victim angrily recalled that the maniac had disappeared after leaving the shopping center. The police officer added that they must wear the smartwatches they were given for now. And then he insistently asked the frightened girls not to go outside today. Finally, the officer promised to inspect the area again and contact him later. Leaving the residents alone, the patrolman slowly walked away down the corridor. Meanwhile, someone's dark shadow flashed unnoticed behind the barred window. Some stranger was quietly hiding on the other side of the barred window. Suddenly, she resolutely opened the door, flashing her stern gaze. And then the fugitive breathed a sigh of relief, glad that no one had noticed her. The girl remembered about the renovation of an empty house that was put up for further rent. A friend's advice to personally check everything when in doubt came to mind. She decided gloomily that on the top floor it would be enough to control the front door. As a result, the heroine firmly decided to watch for the stalker right in this building. A stern and cold image of a mysterious stranger surfaced in her memory. The girl scratched her head in resignation, realizing the full gravity of her risky plan. The number warned of the imminent death of the residents if she did not intervene. And then the heroine was determined to make at least a minimal attempt at salvation. Suddenly, a suspicious silhouette in a hood began to walk heavily down the dark corridor. The girl, watching from behind cover, froze in fear when she noticed the uninvited guest. The clock showed 7 minutes to 10, and time was running out. Meanwhile, the stranger with a bag in his hands slowly continued on his way. And then, the heavy steps of the pursuer suddenly died away in the middle of the empty corridor. The girl realized with horror that the maniac had stopped right in front of the neighboring apartment. A roll of thick tape unrolled with a quiet crack in the pursuer's hands. The girl tried unsuccessfully to see from behind the bars what he was up to. Meanwhile, the stalker began methodically covering the victim's barred window with tape. With a deft movement of his hands, he firmly fixed the glass with adhesive tape. Suddenly, the attacker pulled a heavy pistol out of his pocket. A muffled shot rang out, and the sealed windows silently became covered with a web of cracks. The stalker quickly opened the damaged frame and entered the room unhindered. A moment later, the masked criminal calmly walked back out into the corridor. And then the shocked witness asked herself in bewilderment, "Is he really leaving?" It was already 6 minutes past 10. And the denouement was rapidly approaching. Suddenly, a strange and very suspicious hum echoed throughout the apartment. The girl at the entrance froze in fear, perplexed by the strange noise. Suddenly, she anxiously asked her father what it smelled like. The man fearfully assumed that there was a serious gas leak in the house. And then the father discovered the gas tap in the kitchen fully open. Meanwhile, the witness in the corridor carefully looked inside through the crack. She realized with horror the mortal danger of what was happening behind the door. The head of the family hastily ordered his frightened daughter to open the window for ventilation. Suddenly, thick clouds of smoke poured into the room through the broken glass. Turning around, the heroine saw with horror a cylinder connected to the window. The girl froze in fear when someone outside suddenly pulled the window frame. Suddenly, a creepy guy in a mask burst unceremoniously into the room. Meanwhile, the girl standing in the corridor turned around in fear at the strange noise. And then, in a panic, she tried to comprehend the nightmare that was happening. She grabbed a hose that came to hand and pulled it furiously towards herself. After that, she ran to the locked door and screamed desperately. The woman who burst inside was frozen with horror. And on the floor, a wounded guy was bleeding, barely holding back his groans. She screamed Minso's name as loudly as she could when she noticed the killer standing nearby. The psychopath breathed heavily and ominously and hinted at their long-ago meeting. He angrily reminded her of her escape instead of begging for mercy. The maniac roughly grabbed the child by the hair, causing him to scream. In a rage, the psychopath screamed that he would kill absolutely everyone. Suddenly, the floor beneath their feet began to shake with a roar. The killer stopped abruptly, wondering what the hell was going on around him. The girl who remained outside froze in fear in the middle of the corridor from the roar. And then she felt the approach of a new, much more terrible threat. From the darkness in front of the high-rise building, a sinister, gigantic figure of a stranger emerged. The clock read 10:11, and there were only 21 minutes left until the final. The maniac inside the apartment froze tensely, trying to comprehend the scale of the new danger. Meanwhile, the girl in the corridor stared at her pocket in bewilderment. Suddenly, her phone gave a sharp and unexpected beep. A strange message appeared on the screen, arriving on a smartphone without a SIM card. Meanwhile, the maniac inside the apartment was completely enraged by the extraneous sounds. But the woman who burst in immediately attacked him, starting a furious fight. She held the psychopath back with all her might, desperately ordering Min-so to run away. The frightened girl rushed away through tears, obeying her older sister's order. Screaming loudly in terror, Min-so rushed out through the open door. The witness who remained outside closed her eyes in fear from the sounds of the struggle coming from her. In fact, the maniac had already seized the initiative and was cruelly twisting the woman's arms. The witness in the corridor froze in fear, hearing the woman's piercing screams. The psychopath roughly slammed the unfortunate woman to the floor, breathing heavily from exhaustion. Suddenly, he grabbed the handle of his bloody knife tightly. The sadist screamed furiously, promising to finish off the creature for resisting to the end. Meanwhile, a witness burst into the apartment, sharply pressing the lever of the fire extinguisher. She coolly directed a powerful stream of foam straight into the killer's face. The psychopath closed his eyes in shock, coughing and completely not understanding what was happening. A white smoke screen instantly filled the entire room, disorienting the maniac. The girl anxiously asked the victim how she was feeling and told her to leave quickly. And then she turned around abruptly at the ominous rustling sound behind her. The wounded woman panicked as time began to tick away. The ominous dial showed only 12 minutes and 47 seconds remaining. The psychopath cursed angrily through the smoke, tightening his grip on the handle of his knife. The maniac contemptuously asked the stranger with the fire extinguisher if she was his neighbor. In response, the girl screamed furiously, demanding to know who he was. She sternly demanded to know why he was persecuting this family so cruelly. But the killer only grinned ominously, remembering the old feeling of being watched. The psychopath ironically asked why she needed the news about the reprisal against her ex-girlfriend. The sadist cynically added that journalists would definitely appreciate such a loud, bloody headline. Suddenly, the maniac bared his teeth furiously, ordering her to get out and report anywhere. The madman gripped the knife tightly, threateningly asking about the consequences before the police arrived. With a cry of impending death for the victims, he rushed forward furiously. The attacker swung his weapon sharply, causing the frightened girl to scream in terror. She gritted her teeth in shock, frozen in the face of mortal danger. A bitter thought about the injustice of the nightmare that was happening flashed through her head. Should innocent people really have to suffer because of these crazy, knife-wielding psychos? Horrific images of past attacks and merciless murders came before my eyes. She remembered all the victims whose lives were taken by these monsters. The girl tried to escape with her last strength, while the maniac furiously demanded that she stop. The pursuer finally lost his mind, howling shrilly from the anger that filled him. Suddenly, with a quiet click, the ceiling lamp instantly went out. The pursuer suddenly froze in the middle of the corridor, staring into the frightening darkness. The guy looked around in confusion, breathing heavily and intermittently, and then the motion sensors suddenly went off, causing the light to flash again. He moved slowly further, peering warily into the empty darkness. An ominous, dead silence reigned all around, enveloping the entire long corridor. Meanwhile, the guy turned around in fear, sensing someone's invisible presence. Another flash of light blinded him for a moment, cutting through the darkness. He froze in complete bewilderment, staring intently at the deserted space. The maniac became mentally nervous, trying to figure out if he had imagined strange sounds. The attacker plunged back into the semi-darkness, his head tilted forward ominously. Suddenly, a bright flash of light snatched the silhouette of a stranger from the darkness. The maniac's eyes widened in shock at the unexpected appearance of a formidable opponent. And then, A powerful, crushing blow instantly overtook the confused madman. The boy howled in rage as the unknown savior grabbed his arm harshly. The masked avenger mercilessly dealt the boy several swift, precise blows. Blood spattered across the walls before the shocked girl's eyes. The savior coldly suggested to the defeated enemy that he should respond when the intense pain subsided. The man loomed over him menacingly, asking about his last wish or testament. The beaten criminal only wheezed weakly in response, staring at the black glove. The embittered psychopath swung his knife sharply, furiously shouting insults at the stranger. Suddenly, the ceiling motion sensor went off and the light went out. The attacker stood frozen in the middle of the corridor, breathing heavily and intermittently, and then he looked around in fear, trying to spot his enemy. Meanwhile, the rescued girl backed away, watching what was happening in horror. The madman rushed at her furiously, shouting at her to stop. At that very moment, a dull thud was heard in the darkness of the corridor. The masked savior dealt the maniac a powerful, crushing kick. The victim screamed in fright and surprise, frozen in place from shock. The criminal fell to the floor with a crash, taking the fire extinguisher with him. The masked stranger came closer, calling the lying maniac unexpectedly stable. He coldly warned the psychopath not to make any moves to avoid unnecessary pain. The beaten boy spat out blood furiously, trying to figure out the identity of the formidable savior. And then the frightened girl froze in confusion, wondering where this avenger came from. Heavy footsteps were heard, echoing ominously throughout the empty corridor. Suddenly, the maniac howled with rage again, cursing the creatures that had appeared. The victim's eyes widened in horror, frozen by the fear that washed over her. A damaged wire sparked on the ceiling with a terrible crackling sound, frightening those present. The girl recalled her thoughts about running away and the need to throw away the phone. However, she did not do this, paralyzed by panic fear of her pursuer. The girl closed her eyes in fear, frantically trying to find another way out of the situation. Suddenly, she slowly opened her eyes, realizing the hopelessness of the situation. Someone else's crazy theory about forced killings popped into her mind. This maniac sincerely believed that he was taking the lives of only future executioners. But in reality, he cruelly eliminated those who interfered. The dangerous stranger menacingly demanded an answer for the very last time. These chilling words left her completely confused and frozen. The girl only dreamed of a happy future for all her loved ones. Meanwhile, the gloomy pursuer indifferently inquired about her last wish. Behind them, the beaten guy in the red hoodie only groaned helplessly. The exhausted girl grabbed her head in panic right on the landing, and then suddenly someone's saving hand appeared in front of her face. A familiar friend excitedly extended her hand and invited me to go with her. The girl sincerely thanked her savior, but suddenly hesitated due to the suspicions that arose. The friend became nervous, trying to somehow smooth over the awkward moment and take her away. Then suddenly she asked to lie to the police, as if they weren't there at all. The victim realized with horror that such a terrible crime could not be hidden. The interlocutor only begged him not to at least describe the attacker's appearance to the cops. And then the wounded woman finally realized who these people really were. Meanwhile, outside the windows of the high-rise building, the gloomy twilight of the night was slowly thickening. A trembling hand convulsively grabbed the door handle, trying to get in faster. The girl, scared to death, immediately screamed from the horror that filled her. She rushed with all her might towards her wounded father, who was bleeding. The girl asked excitedly about his well-being, and he only groaned quietly. The friend standing in the doorway watched this scene silently and coldly. The gloomy guy calmly assured that the man would survive with proper treatment. Suddenly, he mercilessly stepped on the defeated enemy with his heavy boot. The strangers spoke calmly about the need to finally get rid of these numbers. The beaten guy in the red hoodie only wheezed, choking on his own blood. The victim, in rage and helplessness, mentally cursed these cruel bastards. The friend was shocked and indignant that they still hadn't killed the maniac. And then the defeated guy helplessly pulled his bloody hand up, blaming those who intervened. He wheezed furiously, asking them if they knew his identity. The villain screamed madly, trying to make his pursuers realize his importance. However, the gloomy girl only responded with a cold and contemptuous wave of her hand. The criminal glared at her from under his black hair hanging over his eyes. Suddenly, the guy walked past calmly, declaring complete indifference to what was happening. The wounded man's memory flashed back to the horrific moments of the knife attack on the innocent. The beaten guy fell silent, doomed, under the stern and heavy gaze of his interlocutor. The girl screamed furiously that she didn't care about the excuses of the would-be child killer. The bloodied criminal only coughed heavily, stubbornly continuing to wheeze something incoherently. And then the friend sighed wearily. Seeing how this bastard just wouldn't calm down, she excitedly urged her gloomy ally to leave because the police would soon arrive. However, the stern guy ordered her to go forward, deciding to interrogate the defeated enemy. Meanwhile, he calmly took out his voice recorder, confident in the success of his idea. The confused girl froze in fear, trying to figure out his true intentions, when suddenly she asked about the hidden meaning of asking about the last wish. The interlocutor chuckled indifferently, since he had no intention of fulfilling someone else's whims. The angry guy rudely told her to get lost if she didn't want to listen. Finally, he dryly advised to climb up strictly via the emergency staircase. Her partner stunned her with his plan, causing the girl to instantly tense up with a bad feeling. He calmly suggested that they should get out not through the usual entrance, but along the roof. Her mouth dropped open in amazement at such a crazy idea. Suddenly, the street was cut through by the shrill, howling sound of an approaching siren. 2 police cars simultaneously approached the building at full speed. Meanwhile, the fugitive was already running up the street iron stairs at full speed. She turned around in fear, expecting an immediate chase from the cops. Having overcome the last steps, the frightened girl finally found herself on a huge, empty roof. She obediently climbed up here, but still looked around in confusion. And then panic overcame her, because the empty roof seemed like the perfect trap. Suddenly, she heard a new, suspicious noise right below her feet. It turned out that 2 more police cars had blocked all the exits from the street. The girl was amazed at how quickly and efficiently these damn cops worked. Moreover, she was terribly angry at the stupidity and carelessness of her partner. She sincerely didn't understand why he wasted time on the recorder, and before his eyes there still stood the image of how he mercilessly dealt with the enemy. And then her gaze fell on a strange object near the ventilation pipe. A climbing rope along with special equipment was lying right on the floor. The girl was taken aback by the realization that they would really have to jump from this height. Meanwhile, someone's heavy steps were already confidently heard on the stairs. Suddenly, a black-haired partner came up from behind and calmly explained his actions. The guy reasonably explained that there were police and cameras watching them at the main gate. Meanwhile, the street surveillance camera slowly turned, scanning the empty perimeter. And then, the frightened fugitive finally realized the full scale of his crazy plan. She looked down at the treetops in shock, dreading the fatal leap. The girl screamed that he would survive, but now she had to figure out how to save herself. Meanwhile, the strong blue rope was already firmly tied to the railing. The guy suddenly put his hand forward, calling on his partner to just shut up. He calmly told her to hold on tight and instantly stepped into the abyss. His partner, screaming in horror, grabbed him with a death grip in mid-flight. The guy concentrated on controlling the descent, his cold gaze directed straight down. Suddenly, a smoking witness appeared on one of the balconies. Meanwhile, the fugitive mentally begged that they would have just a little time. The CCTV camera continued to hang lifelessly on the wall of this multi-story building. Suddenly, strange moths began to circle around her, attracted by the dim light. The guy instantly reacted to the danger, noticing some strange movement out of the corner of his eye, and then he suddenly pushed off with his feet from the concrete wall of the building. This maneuver caused his companion to completely close her eyes and scream hysterically. Now they were both sliding quickly along the rope past the endless windows. The girl continued to scream in horror, cursing this crazy jump. The fugitives flew past the gray walls of the residential complex at great speed. Suddenly, my partner abruptly braked with his feet, dampening the inertia of the crazy descent. The dangerous flight finally ended, leaving behind the frightened cries of the pale companion. Meanwhile, the police report recorded the exact date and evening time. The cops also detailed the exact address of this horrific crime scene. The patrol officers who arrived at the scene immediately began questioning the frightened witness. A little later, sergeants discovered the lifeless, bloody body of a man in the apartment. And then the cops noticed strange numbers tattooed on the murdered man's wrist. The nature of the brutal stabbings clearly indicated the work of a brazen serial killer. But in fact, the main suspect in this case turned out to be the mysterious number. A decent crowd of onlookers and police cars gathered in the parking lot of the residential complex. At that moment, a black sedan pulled up leisurely to the noisy place. A long-haired blonde man in a white suit slowly began to walk outside. His dark-haired partner also exited the car from the other side. The blonde lazily twirled some round metal thing in his hand. The guy sighed and, without much enthusiasm, asked about the essence of what was happening. The partner confirmed that the incident did indeed occur in this building. Then the dandy folded his fingers into a ring, aiming at the upper floors of the high-rise. He squinted silently, peering at his surroundings through the homemade sight. The guy carefully watched the surveillance camera hanging on the pole. Then his gaze smoothly moved to the staircase of the residential complex. A female colleague approached him and respectfully addressed him by his title of Sunbae. She reported receiving the camera footage and asked about his actions. The blonde man jokingly suggested that she check out a cloud that looked like dog excrement. The girl seriously criticized the cloud's shape and demanded that the file be taken away. His partner handed him the tablet, warning him that she had only saved the very last thing. The guy smiled smugly and lazily praised her for her excellent work. Along the way, his partner asked him with displeasure to finally get rid of the stupid yo-yo. Meanwhile, police were on full alert outside the open apartment, cordoning off the entrance with tape. Inside the building, forensic experts carefully collected evidence and photographed the broken window. The gloomy Detective Moon sighed heavily, tired of yet another investigation. The expert reported that the fire extinguisher powder completely destroyed all fingerprints. Moon covered his face with his hands in despair, because there were still no clues. And then, right on the threshold of the apartment, someone's confident voice was heard. The blonde man who arrived unceremoniously inquired about the current location of the injured family. Moon's partner hesitated in confusion at the insolence of the uninvited guests. Detective Kwan handed over the phone, ordering him to enter the address of the hospital where his father was hospitalized. Enraged by Moon's impudence, he sharply called out to the newly arrived, impudent Detective Kwan. Detective Moon sternly reprimanded Kwan for violating crime scene regulations. The forensic experts working in the room turned around in fear at the shouts of their boss. Detective Moon was angry that uninvited guests might trample important evidence. Kwan only smirked condescendingly, apologizing for disturbing their difficult work. The impudent fellow demonstratively stepped with his polished shoes right onto the dirty footprints. Kwan then arrogantly announced that he would return later after studying the video recordings. Kwan's partner bowed politely to her angry colleagues, wishing them luck. Moon's assistant scratched the back of his head in confusion, watching the strange couple go. The young partner tried to soften the situation by standing up for the detectives who had come from afar. Detective Moon was completely enraged by these words. A furious order to return to work followed Kwan and his partner as they left. On the way, the girl ironically asked why Kwan was so disliked. Kwan just smiled slyly, calling the angry boss Moon a tough nut to crack. At that moment, a recording from a street camera started on the tablet screen. Kwan's eyes flashed an ominous red light at the sight of an important detail. However, her partner sighed wearily, not noticing anything special in the video. Kwan insistently suggested that she take a closer look at one particular frame. The partner zoomed in on the image, her eyes widening in sudden shock. The black and white footage showed a mysterious hooded figure climbing the stairs. The girl excitedly noted that this view from behind reminded her of someone. Kwan added that the timing of the stranger's appearance coincided with the power outage. The guy pointedly emphasized that the moment this man left the house was missing. The man, with a sly grin, asked his companion to guess the reason for what was happening. The brunette immediately realized that in that case, only the roof of the building remained. The interlocutor agreed, examining the facade and considering the option of escaping through the lower windows. But blind spots in the surveillance camera map ruled out this route. Suddenly, fresh, deep scratches were discovered on the metal railings. The man happily stated his success, pointing out this important piece of evidence to the girl. Meanwhile, she reasonably noted that the descent from here would have been recorded by the fourth camera. On the yard map, this viewing sector was clearly highlighted in red. Then, her partner excitedly suggested running the video recording and testing her theory. An image of an empty fire escape appeared on the gray monitor screen. Suddenly, the recording showed a swarm of huge moths circling chaotically near the stairs. The partners froze, staring intently at the tablet screen and analyzing what they saw. The blonde man noticed the precise angle of this surveillance camera. In the still image, the device's lens was pointed directly at a concrete flight of stairs. But in fact, the random passerby below simply turned away. Suddenly, a bright flash of light attracted the insects, temporarily blinding the lens. Investigators acknowledged that this circumstantial evidence only vaguely pointed to the perpetrator. Meanwhile, the mysterious guy in the hood had calculated his stealthy route perfectly. The man thoughtfully suggested that the fugitive seemed to have known the future scenario in advance. The girl turned around in surprise and quietly called out to her Sunbae, who was lost in thought. The partner directly asked the Sunbae if this reminded him of his own unique abilities. In response, the man only smiled mysteriously, flashing his left red eye. The action moved to a high-rise city hospital building, flooded with nightlight. An exhausted girl walked slowly along the gloomy corridor, rolling an IV behind her. An investigator's hand appeared from the ward, calling out to a patient passing by in a friendly manner. The man at the table politely greeted the confused and very tired girl. He gently asked his interlocutor not to worry before the usual short interrogation. However, the witness became nervous, staring at the floor in fear from the intense pressure that was building up. The investigator sympathetically inquired about her well-being, promising not to insist if she was in poor condition. The patient quietly assured that she was completely fine and feeling much better. Suddenly, there was a sharp click, causing the patient to flinch in fear. The man grinned with satisfaction, having finally driven the witness into a logical dead end. The interlocutor sternly demanded to tell the absolute truth, his demonic eyes flashing. The girl, shaking with fear, meekly and quietly agreed. Suddenly, he posted a compromising photograph on an open notebook. In fact, the average person only lies a few times a day, but taking into account banal everyday lies, this number exceeds 200. The witness swallowed hard, trying frantically to come up with an excuse, but without success. The atmosphere at the small round table became tense to the limit. And then the detective leisurely propped up his chin, sensing the patient's poisonous anger. The nature of deceivers is too diverse to compile a single universal statistic, but the detective had a rare ability to see through liars. His unique gift allowed him to accurately determine the exact amount of future lies. The man smiled slyly and decided to quickly double-check one important detail. He turned the tablet screen, pointing to the suspect's recorded height. The frightened patient confirmed this initial data with a trembling voice. Meanwhile, she added that due to the darkness, she remembered practically nothing. The detective peered into her face, capturing the pure truth. He then clarified the exact time of this unexpected encounter with the stranger. The girl thoughtfully recalled that the incident occurred immediately after the power outage. The interlocutor asked with a grin whether it would take 3 to 5 minutes, and then the tablet screen recorded the entry of number at exactly 22:11. He suggested that the criminal had escaped after seeing into the future. The moths covered the chambers, allowing the exact time of departure to be calculated. The number left the building at 22:32, spending 5 minutes with a stranger. The man behind the counter slyly inquired about number's actions in the remaining 15 minutes. The girl became frightened and nervous, justifying her accidental presence in the corridor. She added that by the time she left, the boyfriend was no longer there. Suddenly, the detective closed his eyes, having sensed the true reason for the discrepancy. Meanwhile, he pointedly reminded her about the stalker's victim. The girl suddenly tensed up at the mention of the stalker, crossing her arms over her chest. And then she remembered the pursuer's preparations with a ladder and a spray can. The interlocutor clenched her fingers excitedly, asking about the connection between this and the case. The stalker apologized for his tactlessness, trying to unravel the logic behind the number's choice of victims. He asked Miss Shin Un-so point-blank about this crime. The guy suggested that the frightened Shin Un-so simply share her thoughts, but she flatly refused to answer, struggling with growing internal panic. Suddenly, her interlocutor fell silent, registering a clear evasion of the answer. Meanwhile, the man decided not to press harder due to the strong resistance, and then he extended his hand, deciding to ask her one last question. The man placed a photograph of a smiling girl on the table, asking about her. Shin Un-so instantly froze in shock, her eyes widening. And then she remembered the stranger's previous request to pretend to be the police. Plucking up her courage, Shin Un-so confirmed that she had seen her before. She lied and said she came across the girl in the crime news. Suddenly, the interlocutor asked whether this was Mo Hong-chol's lost daughter. He agreed, ironically recalling the blurred face in the report. Meanwhile, the frightened girl started screaming, accusing him of suspicion. The interlocutor coldly inquired about the meaning of the lie for the real victim. But in fact, his gaze flared ominously with a red flame. The man sat distantly at the computer, studying old footage from street cameras. In the dark footage, Shin Un-so, wearing a cap, walked quickly past the stairs. And then a close-up of the smiling face of that very stranger appeared on the screen. He talked about the people saved by number, who were literally on the brink of death. The detective suggested that the survivors might genuinely want to repay the favor. Shin Un-so listened to his conclusions with a gloomy expression, trying her best to hide her excitement. Suddenly, he added that the debtors might simply be hiding something else. Meanwhile, the man covered his mouth with his hand, getting to the main point of the conversation. He asked whether she had seen that girl on the day of the incident. But in reality, the frightened Shin Un-so only lowered her head in silence. The story shifted to the majestic and gloomy building of the Deyoung police station. At the meeting, The detective summed up the protracted discussion of the murder at the Sunlight Apartments. He stood behind the podium in front of a stand with photographs of blood-stained evidence. The officers at the table sighed wearily at yet another pointless chase. The commander reminded them of the Special Forces' reputation, asking about leads on Mo Hongchul's daughter. The speaker noted the high probability of a connection between the missing girl and the mysterious number. Suddenly, a barely noticeable sly grin flashed across his face. Meanwhile, the detective calmly stated that Shin Un-so had not seen her. A close-up of his lips appeared, stretched into a mysterious smile. But in fact, he condescendingly assured the frightened girl that he believed her. The reporter confirmed to the chief that there was no evidence against Mo Ji-hyun. There were no fingerprints or DNA left on the door handle. And then it turned out that there were no clear recordings from the cameras either. Suddenly, someone confirmed the deletion of an important file on the computer screen. Witnesses and the suspect's family also did not tell the police anything useful. The investigator, with a sly grin, ordered the girl to speak in exactly the same way. At the briefing, he ordered his subordinates to continue pursuing Mo Ji-hyun. The black-haired partner stood silently nearby, immersed in her sad thoughts. Meanwhile, a dark sedan with its headlights on noisily pulled out of the parking lot. And inside the car, this cunning man smiled contentedly at his companion. The black-haired girl behind the wheel doubted the wisdom of their treacherous actions. Her companion calmly assured her that there was no reason to worry at all. He explained that Mo Ji-hyun's concealment was merely a precaution. Because of Number's ability to see the future, it is impossible to follow the trail. The cunning man smiled, not wanting to hand over his valuable prey to the legitimate police. The partner only silently and sullenly continued to drive the car through the darkness. In another car, a gloomy brunette decided to start hunting enemies. Meanwhile, someone's hand carefully opened the door of the hospital room. The girl sitting by the bed confirmed with surprise the return of her relative who had entered. The pale man lying on the pillows immediately asked about the detective's verdict. The younger sister fearfully recounted the words of the detective, who did not know the reasons for their salvation. The eldest relative's face darkened after hearing this strange and frightening report. The wounded man admitted that a crazy stalker had been stalking them for no apparent reason. He shuddered as he recalled how this psychopath with a knife had demanded mercy. The daughter showed her father bloody evidence that left a lot of unanswered questions. She could hardly hold back her tears, exhausted by thoughts of a foggy future. Suddenly, her sister hugged her tightly from behind, trying to calm her down. The girl tenderly hugged the poor thing, calling her survival the most important thing. The rescued girl burst into tears on the chest of her protector, and then the older sister smiled through her tears, asking to forget the whole nightmare. Turning her back to the bed, she quietly added that they had had enough. The wounded boy wheezed heavily, trying to catch his breath. He was kneeling in the middle of a destroyed classroom, littered with corpses. The hero's face was covered in blood, and wild horror was frozen in his eyes. In front of him on the desks lay the motionless bodies of Rudy and Hanul. Suddenly, he screamed hysterically, demanding an answer as to why all this was being done. A long-haired girl with a pistol in her hand appeared from the white fog. She calmly stated that she was doing this for his own salvation. The guy was stunned with shock, unable to believe what he heard. Turning around, the crazy stranger, smiling, suggested that the guy simply kill her. And at that very moment, she coldly put the gun to his head. When he woke up, the guy stared gloomily ahead, struggling to remember the terrible memories. It turned out that he was sitting in the car, and his fair-haired companion was sleeping peacefully in the back. The man tiredly pressed his palm to his face, trying to drown out the mental pain. At this time, the guy in the back seat quietly groaned in his sleep, and then the driver sincerely lamented why the nightmares of the past had caught up with him years later. Then he turned his gaze to the open notebook with photographs of buildings. The man decided that there was a lot of work ahead, and it was time to get started. Suddenly, the sleeping guy suddenly opened his eyes from an incomprehensible noise outside. Meanwhile, a black minivan was racing at full speed along a deserted city road. The car braked sharply near the old closed warehouses near the fish market. Getting out of the car, they walked silently along the brick wall of the building. The man suddenly knocked on the blind, tightly closed window of the warehouse. The companion froze in fear, staring at the stern profile of his partner. Pale female hands with tattoos appeared from the slightly opened roller. The stranger sarcastically asked where he had disappeared to after becoming such a celebrity. In response, the man silently put forward a package containing the requested voice recorders. The girl stared at the equipment in surprise, internally amazed by his excessive seriousness. In return, The tattooed hand handed him the treasured business card with the necessary contact information. The interlocutor asked ironically whether this amount should be deducted from the total expenses. The guy's companion suddenly froze, because this voice seemed incredibly familiar to him. She suddenly remembered the old voice recorder that the man always carried with him. Meanwhile, the stranger outside the window was surprised to notice her resemblance to her father. Then the tattooed woman grinned sinisterly, wondering why they had decided to spare her. These mysterious words left my companion completely stunned. The man sharply ordered them to leave, telling them to completely ignore this talkative person. A pale hand waved ironically from the window after the departing guests. The partners walked away in silence, leaving behind the noisy rows of the fish market. A minute later, their black minivan was already racing along the highway. Having settled more comfortably, the passenger muttered discontentedly, inquiring about the essence of the strange meeting that had taken place. The driver gloomily snapped that these voice recorders were none of her business. The girl quietly asked if he wrote down people's dying words before killing them. The man sighed heavily, trying to keep his cool under the barrage of her questions. He calmly explained that these audio recordings serve as final messages for loved ones. An image of a grieving man begging for mercy on his knees appeared before my eyes. Others, however, resignedly dictated their will to lawyers regarding the division of the remaining inheritance. But there were also those who gnashed their teeth in fury from impotent rage. Such people spent their last breath on terrible curses directed at the murderers. His companion listened attentively to his gloomy story, immersed in deep thoughts. Finally, she quietly said that she now understood the true nature of what was happening. Meanwhile, they arrived at a well-kept park, continuing to discuss the value of the recordings. He carefully analyzed the collected information about the deceased in order to later pass it on to the broker. The tattooed woman smiled slyly, knowing that the middleman would easily complete the delivery. The companion objected excitedly, considering collecting evidence from crime scenes too risky. The man coldly retorted that they were only removing clues that were alarming the police. The girl sighed resignedly, realizing that her partner was talking about completely different things. As she climbed the stone stairs, she honestly admitted her complete lack of understanding. But the guy just remained mysteriously silent, continuing to write down and transmit the last words. Meanwhile, the fellow traveler reminded them how they were almost caught last time. She was genuinely puzzled as to why this should continue, but her partner announced his arrival. At last, the girl froze in shock, her eyes wide open in sudden realization. The girl silently watched her gloomy and mysterious partner from behind. The man carefully placed a bouquet of delicate blue flowers in a stone vase near the tombstone. Crouching down, he became immersed in his thoughts under the watchful gaze of his companion. The fellow traveler quietly asked whose burial site was in front of them. The partner calmly replied that the sister of the last man he killed was buried there. These shocking words literally left the girl speechless with horror. Then the guy added wearily, thoughtfully reflecting on the true meaning of his strange actions. That terrible day of emotional breakdown from his distant childhood came back to him again. And then he firmly admitted that he himself voluntarily chose this difficult path of redemption. Already in the car, the man concluded that he had drawn up such a strict rule for himself personally. His companion asked, dumbfounded, if he even treated cold-blooded maniacs that way. The man sternly retorted that the victim's status, kindness, or malice did not matter. He was determined to carry out the last wishes of every suspected killer he killed. His gaze directed at the dictaphone only confirmed his unwavering faith in the chosen principle. The girl stared silently out the window, amazed by such a strange and harsh philosophy. Inwardly, she found it absurd, ridiculous, and completely illogical. Previously, the fellow traveler naively thought that her partner was simply saving innocent people from cruel killers. But now everything has become confusing, causing her to doubt this guy's true motives. His companion wondered with surprise what had made him change so much in the past. Suddenly, the wheels of their minivan began to creak, signaling another unexpected stop. The man dryly commanded them to get out, announcing that they had finally arrived. The companions headed deeper into the noisy night street of the city, flooded with neon lights. A crowd of carefree passers-by crowded around, chatting cheerfully against the backdrop of bright signs. The companion, confused, asked if this was really the right place. The boy grimly confirmed that fulfilling this last wish would complete his list. Suddenly, they found themselves inside a huge, bass-thumping nightclub. Everywhere, a drunken crowd danced wildly, carefreely sipping alcohol from the bottle. The man he killed had once desperately sought revenge on a certain impudent person. That same dangerous enemy sat in the VIP zone, arrogantly watching the dance floor. Having spotted the target, The guy clenched his fists furiously, letting out a low, angry roar. The masked man breathed heavily as he disappeared into a narrow, dark alley. The beaten man in the suit cried desperately and begged him for help. Choking with tears, he screamed furiously and demanded that the enemy be killed. The grim Avenger indifferently clarified who exactly needed to be killed. The stranger's eyes widened in rage, bloodshot with madness. Having burst into the luxurious apartment, the guy saw bloody bodies scattered everywhere. The same man in the suit froze in fear, catching his breath with difficulty. The tattooed bandit wiped the blood from his chin with disgust. The killer arrogantly remarked that the victim should have led a more exemplary life. The victim clutched his head in hysterics, continuing to frantically beg for revenge. The guy in the mask peered intently into the distance, plotting something dangerous. Suddenly, he switched to his notes, surrounded by strange digital interference. Suddenly, someone's hand snatched out a mysterious dark card. It turned out to be an old photograph of a gloomy man with a scar. A gloomy guy with a scar on his face announced his last wish. He longed to take cruel revenge on the one he could never achieve. And then the tattooed thug sprawled out on the sofa with alcohol. And all around him, a crazy night party was in full swing. The man arrogantly ordered the blonde waiter to bring him another bottle. Meanwhile, someone secretive and unnoticed sat down very close to him. The stranger chuckled with displeasure, reproaching the brute for not wanting to let him have some fun. He then got straight to the point, asking for the exact number of targets. Photographs of a woman in glasses and a child were placed on the neon table. The tattooed killer coldly admitted that he doesn't like killing ordinary people. The interlocutor sarcastically asked if he had suddenly felt strong pangs of conscience. The big guy snapped that he was simply too lazy to deal with the consequences for too long. Standing up abruptly, he dryly inquired about the deadline for completing this order. In response, the mysterious client allocated 6 days for all the dirty work. The bandit walked away silently, promising to maintain contact on the phone himself. And on the street, a guy with a scar was watching them closely. The big guy left the club, and the guy continued to watch him from the roof. Suddenly, the killer called his people, ordering them to urgently find out the location of the targets. The companion fearfully asked the scarred man whether this huge man was really their target. And then the guy remembered the strange number 34 in the old photograph. The shocked girl asked in surprise if it was really possible to find out the number from this photograph. In fact, the photograph only shows its previous serial number. Meanwhile, the guy carefully examined the face of this ruthless hired killer. He confidently added that he would have ignored the dying request for the sake of the first numbers. Meanwhile, the tattooed thug continued his serious conversation on the phone. Suddenly, he froze and turned around, feeling someone else's intense gaze on him. And then, the frightened companion instantly crouched behind the stone fence of the roof. The girl breathed heavily, glad that no one had noticed her. Meanwhile, the tattooed mercenary stood thoughtfully against the backdrop of the night city. The gloomy guy with the scar ordered to stop the surveillance because the number was confirmed. But the girl excitedly clarified the details of the deceased man's past desire. She assumed that it was this thirst for revenge that gave rise to the number. Turning his back, the scarred man only responded with indifference to the hypothesis. The companion added that completing that revenge could have saved many lives. Suddenly, the guy objected, stating that there might be a mistake in their conclusions. The shocked companion emotionally exclaimed that it was critically important for them to double-check everything. The boy with the scar closed his eyes for a moment, immersed in difficult memories. The girl recalled that the mysterious numbers had already helped them identify future victims. These obsessive thoughts made him grab his head with his hands in irritation. Suddenly, a terrible picture of a destroyed classroom with the bodies of children appeared before my eyes. In the midst of this bloody carnage, a white-haired woman appeared in front of the kneeling guy. The girl with white hair calmly declared that she was absolutely right. She added that all her personal goals were doomed from the start. The wounded young man, through tears, furiously accused her of blind self-confidence. The white-haired woman snapped that the final number of victims was of no importance at all. Beside himself with anger, the guy could not bear it and screamed hysterically. The guy continued to scream frantically, demanding immediate and honest answers from her. Turning around, he angrily asked if she was even capable of distinguishing people. The plot shifted to a crowd of faceless, identical children, symbolizing defenseless, innocent victims. And then the frightened companion in real time took a timid step back. The gloomy guy suddenly approached her, furiously continuing his heavy monologue. Suddenly, his eyes widened wildly, hanging over the shocked girl. The scarred boy let out a cry, reminding her of her human nature. The stunned companion froze under this barrage of wild accusations and rage. Suddenly, she asked in surprise why he was being so dramatic about everything. The boy with the scar stared at her in shock, clearly not expecting this. The companion calmly replied that the guy himself was complicating quite simple things. She remembered how, in her distant childhood, passers-by would smoke right on the streets. The little girl didn't understand the essence of cigarettes at the time, but suffered terribly from the smoke. The girl added that it should be much easier to distinguish good from evil. The scarred guy just sighed tiredly, covering his face with his hand. He mentally concluded that this naive girl had missed the most important thing. Then the young man turned away abruptly, deciding not to waste any more energy on arguing. He dryly ordered his companion to answer one key question directly. The guy offered a tough choice between the killer and his 33 victims. The confused girl quietly confirmed that she would have chosen to eliminate one killer. The young man nodded contentedly, because he heard from her exactly what he needed. Suddenly, they descended into a busy square in front of a bright neon club. The guy seriously warned that the girl would definitely not cope at her current level. But then he promised to personally teach her the next level of using her eyes. Meanwhile, they moved to a dark back alley to a black van. The girl opened a digital map on her tablet with the exact location of the killer's house. The scarred man added that this dangerous mercenary usually hides in his secret office. He then persistently asked how much time this target had left to live. The companion excitedly recalled the strange glowing numbers 14 and 9 she had seen earlier. And then the guy gloomily deciphered this meaning as 14 years and 9 months. The guy rightly noted that a killer physically wouldn't have time to kill so many people. Then he pointed with a huge, ghostly hand to their main strategic objectives. The girl must discreetly capture the faces of all members of this dangerous gang. Hearing about such a risky mission, the companion pointed her finger at herself in fear. The scarred youth firmly promised to teach her a new secret method. This advanced eye level will open the way for her to see a better future. Suddenly, they moved inside an abandoned hangar. Sitting opposite each other, 2 black combat pistols lay on the wooden box in front of them. The shocked girl stared at this deadly weapon with a quiet groan. Meanwhile, she asked her gloomy partner in confusion what this meant. The partner put the gun to his temple, explaining the rules of the deadly game with 2 pistols. He tossed one of them carelessly back onto the cloth-covered box. Then the guy sternly demanded that he make a choice and get ready to pull the trigger. The frightened companion stared at him in shock, not believing her own ears. She recoiled in panic, begging him to stop this crazy and dangerous joke. But the young man coldly added that the empty pistol would save her life. But a charged weapon will instantly reset the remaining time to absolute 0. The girl froze, turning pale with horror in the face of the sudden mortal threat that had suddenly overwhelmed her. And then the partner tapped him on the head, revealing the true nature of this crazy test. The companion crossed her arms tensely, trying to comprehend this crazy way of using her eyes. The girl suddenly realized with horror that this was the time of her life. Strange dolls with timers appeared before my eyes, and her counter reset to 0. Brunette explained that once the technique is mastered, watching will become much easier. She thought hard, suddenly remembering a very important past moment. Then it suddenly dawned on her that she had seen her own time. The guy sharply poked his finger right into her forehead, interrupting her thoughts. He ordered to immediately concentrate and present the figures right there. The girl obediently closed her eyes, trying with all her might to catch the necessary mental images. And then her eyes suddenly flew open from a powerful flash of energy. The shocked heroine screamed in fear, not believing her own eyes. The girl joyfully shouted that she could see numbers floating in the air again. The grim mentor dryly ordered her not to relax and make the next choice. On the wooden box in front of her lay 2 absolutely identical black pistols. And then her left eye flashed brightly with a mysterious golden light. Suddenly, the guy sharply put the cold barrel of a gun right to her head. He calmly asked if she had really chosen the left pistol. The man told me to warn him immediately if the treasured numbers started to rapidly decrease. The frightened heroine screamed in panic that the indicators had indeed started to go down. Breathing heavily from the shock she had experienced, she convulsively clutched the clip in her hands. Then she shouted indignantly at her partner, who only calmly confirmed the seriousness of her intentions. The mentor explained that in order to better distinguish numbers, one must take real risks. The girl only moaned in fear, having a hard time going through this crazy lesson. The diagram clearly showed how this principle applies to all forks in the road, and this would really allow us to completely avoid hidden pits and dangerous traps. This ability helped to move forward, advancing only on the safest places. The brunette added that discreetly photographing faces would be an easy task even for an inexperienced girl. The heroine remained gloomily silent, immersed in her not-so-cheerful thoughts. On the one hand, she really wanted to save future victims, but a strong fear arose of making a fatal mistake and finding myself in mortal danger. However, the guy firmly cut him off, saying that he didn't believe in such doubts at all. The guy sternly added that other people's mistakes would not change his personal numbers. The girl listened in surprise to his words that nothing would prevent him from destroying the target. Against the backdrop of the nighttime metropolis, he arrogantly advised us to stop worrying about all sorts of nonsense. Meanwhile, on the busy neon street, a vibrant nightlife was in full swing. A stern man with a scar and a tattoo on his neck suddenly stood out from the crowd. The huge brute confidently strode forward, looking at passers-by with his chilling gaze. At that moment, the man he was pursuing disappeared into the dark city alleys. And then the heroine's partner's right eye began to blaze furiously again. He remembered the mysterious guy in the hood, who cleverly avoided unfavorable choices for himself. Images of shackles and numbers decreasing by 1 flickered ominously on the screen. The reduction in numbers means that it is impossible to save people through necessary killing. A brunette in a black coat walked silently through the dense evening crowd. Passers-by hurried past indifferently, completely oblivious to the hidden danger. And then he turned sharply into a deserted, ominous city dead end. Meanwhile, someone's leisurely, heavy steps were heard in the gloomy alley. An empty soda can suddenly fell from above with a crash. The pursuer reacted instantly, turning sharply towards the suspicious noise. An ordinary gray cat sat on a rusty roof and meowed loudly. Suddenly, the guy's eyes widened in fear from the sudden realization of a trap. From the darkness, a tattooed thug's powerful fist flew out like lightning straight at his jaw. The attacked guy barely managed to block the enemy's furious attack with his hand. The gloved bandit immediately tried to snatch the hidden bladed weapon. He grinned bloodthirstily, delivering a swift, chopping blow with a sharp knife. The brute was genuinely surprised that the man he was pursuing had managed to dodge so easily. It turns out he had been expecting some small fry to be on his tail for a long time. The tattooed big guy sarcastically asked who the hell his opponent was. The pursuer only sighed heavily, gripping the curved combat karambit tighter. And then the front door of the office swung open with a deafening roar. The employees inside stared in fear at the uninvited and dangerous guests. The scarred bandit grimly confirmed to his partners that this was the very place. The tattooed giant muttered discontentedly that it was a bit cramped in here, and ordered that the witnesses be removed. The room was instantly filled with shrill cries of pain and the sounds of brutal blows. The attacker moved forward in cold blood while his men mercilessly eliminated the managers. With a malicious grin, the thug began to personally cut up everyone who came to hand with a knife. In the midst of the bloody carnage, he furiously shouted out the description of the boy with white hair. He then called out loudly to Junebum, demanding that he immediately report the target's location. Looking around the hall strewn with bodies, the scarred bandit triumphantly stated that he had finally found the one he needed. The victim, wearing a Hawaiian shirt, stared in horror as the blade approached his throat. The man began coughing blood, fighting for his life with all his might. The poor guy wheezed in fear, wondering who they were and why they were doing this. Suddenly, a merciless blade plunged straight into the unfortunate man's open mouth. The poor fellow clutched the table convulsively, trembling and begging not to kill him. The scarred attacker only sarcastically asked if he was really asking for mercy. The wounded man's eyes widened in horror, realizing that there would be no mercy. The big guy grinned sinisterly, calling the guy interesting and continuing to mock him. The victim, through tears and splashes of blood, continued to piercingly pray for salvation. But the tattooed bandit cold-bloodedly and with lightning speed delivered his final fatal blow. Meanwhile, the boss, wearing glasses, approached and praised him for his excellent work. Then the man in the suit asked who these guys were. The scarred fighter remained sullenly silent, wiping fresh drops of blood from his face. The scarred fighter cynically remarked that these corpses were simply part of an order. And at this time, an ominous thunderstorm darkness descended upon the night city. Two guys stood near the club's bright sign and leisurely smoked. Suddenly, their silhouettes came into close-up focus through the lens of a smartphone camera. The girl, watching from cover, breathed a sigh of relief, having already counted 7 targets. She thought wryly that this surveillance was reminiscent of collecting Pokémon. The heroine understood perfectly well that sooner or later the objects would still go home. Meanwhile, She had been acting alone on the stairs all day. Greedily chewing the bun, the girl frantically tried to remember her mentor's words about risk, and then the stern face of a brunette suddenly appeared before her mind's eye. The scarred, brutish attacker landed a powerful, crushing right hook on his opponent, but the brunette instantly regrouped and responded with a lightning-fast, stinging counterattack. In a fierce hand-to-hand fight, the curved blades of the boys crossed with a whistling sound. With a lightning-fast and daring kick, the fighter made the tattooed giant stagger. The huge brute admitted through gritted teeth that this guy was a real professional. But in reality, the wounded guy only grabbed his karambits more furiously. Footage of fencing matches between fencers in white protective gear flashed on the screen. Meanwhile, any game, be it chess, requires impeccable intelligence. The whole point of fighting at Tangled Forks comes down to a battle for the moment. The boxer's diagram showed the importance of being able to strictly control and break the distance. My head was spinning with calculations of the opponent's weak spots for the purpose of a decisive feint. The fighters circled furiously in the narrow alley, changing the grips of their blades with lightning speed. The gloomy guy coldly calculated the consequences of every decision he made, and then his opponent realized the fatal advantage of someone else's choice. The big fighter panicked as the initiative was suddenly slipping out of his hands. Suddenly, the swift opponent took control immediately after the lunge. The distance was rapidly closing, forcing the defending guy to retreat in a hurry. Instead of the expected evasion, the opponent suddenly launched a daring attack. The black-haired swordsman dodged with incredible speed, as if he had foreseen absolutely everything. The sweat-covered giant cursed under his breath, refusing to believe what was happening. Suddenly, the black-haired guy's left eye ominously flared with a bright blue flame. On the cloth lay 2 pistols, which determined the correctness or incorrectness of the choice. The owner of the blue flame mechanically adapted to any actions of a powerful enemy. To recognize other people's hidden numbers, a person definitely needed eyes. And then he realized that his own values were felt directly in the brain. The decision, the coming future, and its numerical equivalent were instantly analyzed by consciousness. An endless stream of feedback was processed within the mind in a matter of milliseconds. Meanwhile, an ordinary person physically could not keep up with the best option. The decisive thrust of the blade reached its target, leaving a bloody mark on the enemy's chest. The wounded thug's eyes widened in fury as the pain approached him. A lightning-fast knee strike to the body finally shattered the powerful opponent's defense. The big guy fell on his back with a crash among the boxes scattered in the alley. Choi Chung-hyuk breathed heavily as he fiercely declared his 33rd number. Killing his opponent, in his opinion, could save 33 innocent lives. The wounded fighter only grinned ominously, finally realizing the true nature of his attacker. The brunette remained calmly silent, watching intently the frantic reaction of his defeated enemy. And then the defeated thug burst into wild laughter, because all the pieces of the puzzle fell into place. Suddenly, Choi Chung-hyuk's hand tightly gripped the curved blade, pausing for a moment. Through the digital static, the image of a wounded boy on the steps surfaced in my memory, and then the silhouette of a mysterious albino with long hair appeared before my eyes. The blonde guy was smiling madly, holding a massive revolver in his bloody hand. And then the brunette fell into a stupor, dumbfoundedly asking his interlocutor to repeat himself. Meanwhile, the out-of-breath guy rushed away, breathing heavily and intermittently. 2 menacing thugs with bats were already waiting for him on the landing, and from the bottom of the stairs, 3 more tattooed bandits were sauntering up. Suddenly, the fugitive froze, finding himself trapped in the middle of a narrow passage. Someone's pale hand carefully picked up a transparent sealed bag from the floor. The unknown person handed the find to the frightened fugitive, calling him a bot. A stern man in glasses and a business suit looked at the guy coldly. The cornered fugitive stared in horror at the intruder. The defeated big guy continued to laugh hoarsely, assuring that everything had finally become clear. The brunette abruptly lowered the blade, startled by the sudden mention of the mysterious albino. His gaze darkened with rage, and a stunned question burst from his chest. Suddenly, he grabbed the wounded enemy tightly by the chest, demanding an explanation. The tattooed fighter, covered in sweat, only breathed heavily from the onset of weakness. The black-haired swordsman furiously ordered that the words he had just said be repeated immediately. He demanded that the big guy give him absolutely everything he knew about this albino girl. The defeated enemy fell into a stupor under his furious onslaught. Meanwhile, on the crowded streets of the metropolis, life as usual continued to bustle. And on the cold floor, in a pool of blood, the tortured bodies lay motionless. The tattooed man in the leather jacket scratched the back of his head in confusion, Recalling recent events, a deafening shot rang out from a bloody hand, ending someone else's life. The man cursed sullenly to himself, realizing the seriousness of the suddenly revealed truth. It turned out that a blonde albino girl had committed a brutal massacre in a panoramic office. She turned around, revealing her face, stained with someone else's blood, but calm. When their eyes met, the man bluntly stated that she had taken his job. He suspiciously asked if the mercenary had received a similar order. The girl calmly explained that these people were cruelly abusing defenseless children. The bandits brazenly threatened physical violence right in the middle of a busy street. The rescuer initially mistook the man for their accomplice who had come to commit murder. The mercenary, her face bloodied, smiled madly as she questioned the man about his virtue. In response, her interlocutor merely measured her with a heavy, incredibly gloomy look. The wounded victim grinned, recalling their previous work encounters in China. The swordsman listened silently, continuing to grip the collar of his weakening opponent with a death grip. And then the thug croaked that story had happened many years ago. The brunette narrowed his eyes furiously, finally losing the remnants of his vaunted patience. In a rage, he dealt a powerful blow, causing the big guy to howl wildly in pain. The tattooed fighter merely grinned defiantly, flatly refusing to reveal the location of the mysterious girl. Suddenly, the black-haired guy did a quick somersault, dodging the new threat. He jumped back sharply, noticing the silhouette of an armed pursuer on the roof of the alley. The swordsman turned around in shock, breathing heavily at the sudden and violent turn of events. His left eye pulsed madly, overloaded with a sharp flash of hidden power. The brunette screamed from the unbearable pain that gripped his body, exhausted to the limit. Meanwhile, the tattooed thug deftly jumped over the high roof railing. And then the guy realized that he had strained his eyes too much in a matter of seconds. The opponent disappeared without a trace, taking advantage of the temporary weakness of his ferocious pursuer. The panoramic office in China, where their paths crossed, came back to mind. The exhausted swordsman sank powerlessly onto the cold ground right in the middle of a narrow alley. He gloomily assumed that the fugitive had gone straight home or to the office. Meanwhile, a luxurious dark sedan was racing along the highway at full speed. The tattooed giant sat in the car, buttoning his shirt over his bandages. The driver worriedly asked who dared to treat the boss so cruelly. The injured bandit grumbled a short and pithy word in response. Suddenly, his mobile phone rang, breaking the silence with a loud vibration. The big man quickly accepted the challenge from his subordinate named Junbum. The bespectacled assistant excitedly reported the capture of a long-standing, suspicious rat. At first, the man was very confused by the capture of an ordinary young girl. However, the captive turned out to be the same daughter of Chol who disappeared along with Nomer. The boss's eyes widened in shock at such unexpected and stunning news. And then he grinned predatorily and ominously, anticipating the upcoming interesting game. The bespectacled assistant quickly ordered all the fighters to be brought into position. Meanwhile, the swordsman furiously gnashed his teeth, trying to cope with the wild pain. The guy leaned heavily against the wall, catching his breath after the grueling fight. And then he firmly decided that he would no longer allow the enemy to escape. And the tattooed boss on the other end of the line predatorily ordered an ambush. Sunlight flooded the endless high-rises of the metropolis. Frozen in anticipation, the black-haired swordsman silently opened the heavy door, entering the gloomy building. He began to carefully descend the dark flights of empty stairs. The guy peered carefully into the room, trying not to reveal his presence. In the depths of the basement, he saw bound hostages guarded by those same bandits. The brunette in the brown shirt sarcastically greeted his rival who had finally arrived. And then Mo Ji-hyun tensed up, noticing the obvious threat. The captive girl looked ahead with fear, awaiting the outcome of this meeting. The scarred enemies cynically suggested that the girl was truly special to the hero. The bandit offered a deal, promising to release the hostage in exchange for complete peace of mind. Suddenly, a sharp knife blade was coldly pressed to the throat of the frightened captive. Mo Ji-hyun remained sullenly silent, frantically weighing all the risks. But in fact, the guy firmly refused, offering to do whatever the enemies wanted. Hearing that her savior didn't care about her, the girl fell into a complete stupor. The enemy only ominously asked if the brunette understood the hidden meaning of his words. The girl remembered with shock how the brunette had previously cold-bloodedly pointed a gun at himself. The scarred leader merely chuckled dismissively, accepting the rules of this crazy game. The enemy stepped forward firmly, agreeing to fulfill his opponent's frightening wish. Mo Ji-hyun stood calmly as the crowd of bandits slowly surrounded him. The leader reminded his subordinates that fear would inevitably lead them to a quick death. He ordered to attack in a crowd, because a lone guy only has 2 arms. And then he added that with their combined forces, they would inflict a multitude of blows on the enemy. The thugs obediently swung their weapons, ready to instantly kill the insolent loner. Suddenly, the scarred boss turned around. Hearing a confident call from behind, Mo Ji-hyun ordered the enemy to remember the past, promising to ask many questions. The bandit only snapped back rudely, sending his impudent opponent packing. Mo Ji-hyun's eyes flashed furiously, promising to return the favor after the memories. The enraged leader immediately gave a stern order to kill the guy immediately. The captive cowered in fear as dangerous sparks flared up around her, and then she frantically forced herself to think for the sake of survival. Meanwhile, the bandit again growled the order to get rid of the girl. The girl froze in wild horror, sensing a mortal threat. Suddenly, someone pulled a firearm out of a holster with lightning speed. The loud click of the shutter caused the entire crowd of attacking bandits to suddenly freeze. The next second, the barrel of the pistol menacingly pointed straight at the enemies. The leader's face was distorted with rage and rising panic, but in fact, the barrel of the gun was pointed directly at the captive. The frightened girl's right eye was suddenly filled with a bright, mystical light. The next moment, a deafening shot rang out, killing the hostage outright. The man in glasses grabbed the limp body of the falling girl in horror. Meanwhile, Mo Ji-hyun didn't even flinch after the shot. The bullet pierced the bandit standing behind the girls with a roar. The scarred enemy was taken aback, realizing that the guy hadn't been shooting by feel at all. Suddenly, one of the thugs swung a pipe with a furious curse. A powerful blow knocked the pistol out of the hands of the hero, who was caught off guard. But the guy immediately deftly twirled the curved karambit in his hand. With a lightning-fast swing, he brutally slashed the attacking enemy, drawing blood. At that moment, the dropped pistol rolled across the floor with a clang. The now weaponless thug furiously ordered Mo Ji-hyun to die. The hero only frowned at the approaching new threat. Suddenly, a powerful kick to the head knocked the guy off his feet. The scarred boss watched the gang's triumph with satisfaction and menace. An exhausted Mo Ji-hyun fell to the floor at gunpoint. And then he looked furiously from under his brows at his triumphant enemies. The leader only narrowed his eyes arrogantly and ominously in response. The enraged boss screamed furiously, ordering the defenseless enemy to be finished off immediately. Suddenly, someone's foot in sneakers suddenly took off. It turned out that the wounded girl, with the last of her strength, made a desperate escape. And then Mo Ji-hyun jumped up with lightning speed, slashing at the nearest bandit. The shocked leader stood frozen in stupefaction along with his frightened assistant. At this time, the fugitive quickly ran away down the corridor. The scarred boss furiously ordered his subordinate to immediately grab the girl. Meanwhile, the hero continued to mercilessly cut down the attacking thugs with his karambit. Ominous blue target markers suddenly flashed in the eyes of the remaining enemies. The guy quickly counted all the opponents, instantly assessing their protective equipment. The system immediately identified 2 opponents that the guy absolutely could not eliminate. Suddenly, an unexpected, powerful blow flew from behind towards Mo Ji-hyun, but the guy dodged with lightning speed, and the leader's fist flew past his head. The next second, the hero counterattacked sharply, causing the scarred boss to stagger violently. Mo Ji-hyun breathed heavily as he held his ground against the enemy's superior numbers. And then he got angry, mentally calling the attacking bandits an annoying pack of mongrels. Another group of thugs calmly prepared their knives, pinning the guy in a ring. Suddenly, the scarred boss furiously rushed into close combat again. With a powerful swing of his tattooed hand, the bandit tried to get the evasive guy. Mo Ji-hyun let out a low growl from the sudden tension, enveloped in crimson sparks. One of the thugs swung his pipe furiously, preparing to deliver a crushing blow. Suddenly, Mo Ji-hyun intercepted the attack and harshly hit the enemy with his head. A white-haired girl appeared in the boy's mind, urging him to simply give up because of weakness. The bloodied hero grinned furiously, flatly refusing to accept his own defeat. The next second, he grabbed the arm of the thug who was attacking him. With a lightning-fast circular motion, the guy effectively turned his opponent with his back to himself. Mo Ji-hyun twisted and mercilessly thrust his sharp blades straight into the target. The bandits standing nearby widened their eyes in shock at such savage cruelty. Grabbing the wheezing enemy, the guy in a chilling tone asked him to say his last words. And then, with a merciless swing of his hand, he finished off his defeated opponent. The frightened fugitive ran down the corridor with all her might, away from her pursuer in glasses. Suddenly, the passages began to flicker ominously with a frightening yellow light. The girl's right eye shone brightly again, identifying the right middle door. She frantically pulled on the round handle as she walked, trying to save herself. The pursuer in the suit hissed furiously, not having time to intercept the stubborn girl. The next second, the door closed with a loud click right in front of his nose. Running inside, the captive looked around the dark, dead-end room with wires in fear. Breathing heavily from the mad rush, she tried in panic to figure out what to do next. And then the timers flashed before her, inexorably leading to her imminent death. Suddenly, the locked door shook with a terrible roar from powerful blows from the outside. Yellow sparks rained down furiously on the heavy metal door from the incessant blows. Suddenly, the lock gave way with a grinding noise under the powerful pressure from outside. The captive gritted her teeth, realizing that she only had 3 minutes left. Mo Ji-hyun remembered how her life was literally hanging by a thread. The girl's golden eyes frantically searched for any way to escape, and then she realized that she had miraculously managed to reduce the number of murders. The heroine peered fearfully into the darkness, trying to unravel the true meaning of her existence. The next second, she turned sharply at the ominous rustling sound behind her. The sturdy wooden door swung open with a crash under the powerful blow of the pursuer. The enemy in the suit stepped inside in cold blood, trapping the frightened girl in a dead end. The bespectacled man scratched the back of his head in cold blood, declaring that they would not allow her to survive. He suddenly added that this was the result of following the sick bastard, and then he grinned nastily, reminding her whose daughter she was. The girl clenched her teeth in rage at these mocking words. Suddenly, she pulled the fire hose valve towards herself. The powerful blast of icy water knocked the arrogance off the enemy's face. He just choked in shock, not even having time to react to the attack. Meanwhile, the brave heroine struggled to hold back the raging fire hose. She shouted back furiously at the bastard to stop making fun of her. It turns out that they were the ones who dragged her head over heels into all this dirt. The stream of water hit the attacker right in the face, blinding him. But the man quickly noticed exactly where this powerful stream was directed. He realized in a panic that the electrical panel behind him was completely open. Meanwhile, the brave heroine grinned madly, holding the fire hose in her hands. Suddenly, the enemy realized that her jacket and hose were a cunning plan. Water instantly rushed into the wires, causing a terrible and dangerous short circuit. The man screamed wildly in surprise as everything around him began to sparkle. And then he suddenly jumped back, trying to save himself from the electric discharges. An enraged stream of sparks and water filled the entire space around the shield. At that very second, the light in the entire room suddenly went out. In the pitch darkness, the beaten hostage only muttered in fear through his teeth. The bespectacled man cursed angrily, breathing heavily in the middle of the dark room. Ji-hyun froze in anger, catching her breath heavily after the dangerous maneuver. In fact, it was a calculated trick based on experience. Suddenly, someone's chilling blue eye flashed ominously in the darkness. It turned out to be the smartest and most effective move on her part. The bandit in the red shirt, taken aback, swore at the top of his lungs. He then ran into his accomplice, furiously demanding that he give him a flashlight immediately. Scarface shouted at the others to quickly turn on the flashlights on their smartphones. But at that very second, his partner silently choked on his own blood. In the pitch darkness, the beaten hostage only muttered in fear through his teeth. The bespectacled man cursed angrily, breathing heavily in the middle of the dark room. Ji-hyun froze in anger, catching her breath heavily after the dangerous maneuver. In fact, it was a calculated trick based on experience. Suddenly, someone's chilling blue eye flashed ominously in the darkness. It turned out to be the smartest and most effective move on her part. The bandit in the red shirt, taken aback, swore at the top of his lungs. He then ran into his accomplice, furiously demanding that he give him a flashlight immediately. Scarface shouted at the others to quickly turn on the flashlights on their smartphones. But at that very second, his partner silently choked on his own blood. The armed bandit screamed in panic, realizing that someone was cutting their accomplices. In the pitch darkness, they screamed in fear as the lamps suddenly broke. Suddenly, a bloodthirsty blue gleam cut through this frightening darkness again. The criminals froze in horror, blinded by the furious and precise neon flashes. Scarface shouted at his partner with all his might, demanding that he immediately turn on the flashlight. He furiously ordered the others to quickly light up their smartphone screens. But the next bandit only silently choked on blood from the deadly blow. The girl thought that she could secretly help him stealthily kill enemies. Meanwhile, the bespectacled man looked around in panic, trying to spot the attacking anomaly. And then the secretive Avenger suddenly picked up a heavy bottle from the floor. The bespectacled man grinned angrily as a blade flashed right in front of his nose. Suddenly, a thrown bottle shattered into pieces with a crash on the bandit's head. The protagonist cold-bloodedly decided to increase his own lifespan at their expense. His face was hidden by a frightening shadow, and his eyes glowed with a fierce neon light. With a lightning-fast and precise blow, the guy pierced the stunned enemy's neck. At the same second, the rest of the attackers began to fall one after another. The bald brute tried to swing the bat, but the blue whirlwind had already caught up with him. The guy mercilessly slashed at his opponents with a knife, moving at the limits of human capabilities. The attacker in the red shirt screamed hysterically from multiple and fatal stab wounds. A powerful and final neon flash brought this quick massacre to a bloody close. The wounded, scar-faced bandit clenched his teeth in fury from impotent rage. Suddenly, a blue, ghostly blade firmly fixed his neck. The brunette gloomily recalled the fateful day of December 1st, 2026. Ji-hyun listened in shock as he said her real name and the number 33. Blood dripped continuously onto the floor as the boy held his enemy's throat tightly. He harshly suggested to the leader that he complete his personal revenge with his own death. The Avenger then condescendingly promised to fulfill any last dying wish of the bandit. The scarred-faced man, breathing with difficulty, slid heavily down the wall onto the blood-soaked floor. The boy ordered him to tell everything he knew about the silver-haired, sighted girl. The bloodied criminal only grinned mockingly, asking about possible mercy in case of refusal. The protagonist sternly stated that mercy was absolutely out of the question. Muttering darkly, he promised to destroy absolutely all such bastards. The wounded enemy only laughed hoarsely and madly in response. The leader mockingly called him a naive fool, spitting out his own blood. He added that he had seen all sorts of things during his long life. Suddenly, the bandit bitterly admitted that he was just a pawn. Customers use it as a regular weapon for their own purposes. If he dies, they can easily buy themselves a new instrument. Savior Ji-hyun listened to this calmly, expressing only a laconic bewilderment. And then he suddenly grabbed the defeated enemy by the hair. The Avenger asked angrily if he should simply watch the future murders. He angrily demanded to know exactly when they had crossed paths on a foreign assignment. Ji-hyun watched this harsh interrogation from the sidelines with fear. Suddenly, the defeated scar-faced man only hoarsely exhaled the last drops of air. As he lay dying, the criminal quietly added that the sighted girl was right here in Korea. The guy froze in shock from such unexpected and important information. At that very second, he electrified his combat kunai to the limit. The merciless brunette swung with lightning speed to finish off this bastard. A sharp, ghostly blade whistled through the air, finishing what had been started. And then the guy mercilessly delivered the final blow to the leader's neck. The dying bandit croaked out one last time that his executioner was an absolutely crazy psychopath. The wounded guy silently looked at his hand, which was shaking from the wild strain. Suddenly, through the veil of blood, he heard the enemy's last mocking prophecy. The cold-blooded Avenger pulled out a bloody kunai, its blade flashing ominously. With a quiet clang, the weapon fell from the guy's hands onto the blood-soaked floor. The surviving hostages only groaned in fear in the midst of this terrible massacre. The guy sighed heavily and tiredly, trying to come to his senses after the cleanup. Meanwhile, he turned to Ji-hyun, declaring the matter over. The girl obediently stepped forward, her sneakers noisily stepping into a crimson puddle. She asked excitedly what they should do with the surviving man with glasses. There was a guy lying unconscious on the floor with glasses lying nearby. The frightened girl ran up to him, loudly asking if everything was okay. The wounded brunette was overcome with sweat from the wild, pulsating pain. Meanwhile, someone's heavy shoes began to confidently walk up the stairs. The brunette convulsively grabbed the railing, remembering her past actions. Turning around, she excitedly told the guy that she had managed to notice something, but the bloodied fighter was barely able to maintain his balance with his last strength. It turned out that the poor guy's tired brain had finally reached its limit. The unfortunate man's mind was reeling from the shock, plunging him into deep unconsciousness. With a loud splash, the boy's consciousness finally fell into the dark abyss, slowly sinking into the sea of memories. The guy sank deeper and deeper. His fading consciousness stubbornly clung to fragments of the distant past. And then a source burned to the ground appeared before him. Hands leafed through an old comic book, returning to the day of that meeting. Suddenly, an unfamiliar, surprised girl looked into the room. She enthusiastically admitted that she had never seen him here before. Then the curious guest immediately asked what his name was. But in reality, No one behind the fence of this shelter knew the answer. The teenager only quietly replied that he didn't have a name yet.